Morning, everybody. I'm just waiting. Well, good morning and welcome. It's my pleasure to be. My name is Michele. I'm Chief Executive of NHS Teaching. And it gives me great pleasure to see some people in the audience, if albeit a little bit scary sometimes when we've all been away from each other for so long. But it's great to see people in the audience. Also, welcome to everybody that's dialing in and being streamed in. What a fantastic sessions we're going to have over the next couple of days. And we've divided it into a couple of days as we did last year because of the restrictions. People, please, in the room, if you are with us, make sure you're wearing masks. We've got the chair set out 2 meters apart, and please do help yourself to refreshments, but do follow those precautions as we go through. And thank you all for doing your tests. Welcome to everybody at home, as I've said. We've got an absolutely full-packed agenda, and I'm really looking forward to listening to the speakers. I am chair of the Clinical Research Network for Yorkshire and Humber, so there's really something here for everybody. As I say, we've got over 350 people that are dialing in, and we've got varied speakers, but thank you everybody that's made this possible. Alison, who's done a lot of the, if not all of the administration, but Catherine as well, because doing one conference is bad enough, but doing two vis-a-vis in person and online is a complete and utter nightmare. So to get everybody in the same place at the same time and on stream is amazing. And thank you to our company that are doing the streaming for us today. No more from me. I will be around in the audience, and I will be listening with great intent at the fantastic speakers that Alison and Catherine and others have managed to pull together over this last year. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the chair of today's session, Dr. Soraya Mayet, who is consultant in addictions and also our medical education director for Humber Foundation Trust, but also senior lecturer at Hull and York Medical School. So no further ado, usual round of applause to welcome everybody online at home. I think we've got to say a lot of people listening in. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Michele, and it's absolutely fantastic to be here today to welcome everyone to our Humber Research Conference. It's the first time that we've done it this way, so please bear with us. Everyone's working behind the scenes to get everything there for you. So I know it's been an absolutely difficult few years for everyone, but it's so wonderful to actually have the opportunity to see you all face to face, some of you, and of course all the people at home who are logging in. So please let us know where you're coming from and where you're actually where you are at the moment. If you can, please do use the live Q&A for any of your questions. But of course, if you want to make any comments about where you're working or where you're from, it'd be wonderful to hear more about that too. If anyone wants to see more about what's on the programme today, please can you look on, we've got programmes here, but on Everbright, there's all the details of the programme and the biographies of all the speakers. And we've got an absolutely wonderful range of speakers today from all over the place who have come especially here to tell us about what's happening internationally and nationally. We've got the audience viewing online, so if you have your camera or mic on, please turn it off. We are recording, and of course I've mentioned about the Q&A. If anyone in the audience here would like to ask a question, please do raise your hand, and we'll be coming around at the end of each presentation to ask questions. So I'd love to hear from you. It's great that we can actually see you face to face to actually get the, your reactions and hear what you want to say. We'll be sending the link to complete the evaluation form by SurveyMonkey. And if anyone's on social media, I'm sure some of you are, please do with our Twitter, and that's hashtag Humber Research 2021. So I'm going to now move on to our first speaker, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our first speaker. He's been helping to really support all of us in this fight against the pandemic and ensuring that what we are doing on the ground level and what the government knows or what they should be doing, at least kind of trying to let them know all the evidence and all the information and all the research behind that. So please can I welcome Professor Calum Semple OBE, and please give a wonderful round of applause to welcome Professor Calum. Thank you.
Well, good morning, colleagues, and it's indeed a pleasure and an honour to be speaking to you today, particularly as we're actually here in person, which is so exciting. Can I have our first slide, please? Thank you very much. So I've been asked to talk to you about the ISARIC clinical characterisation protocol, and I'm going to curtail the talk because over dinner, John and Soraya asked if we could extend the question session. So the latter slides I will whiz through quite quickly, but let's get on. So what is this study all about? Well, the thing is that outbreaks actually are quite common. We in our living memory, as far as I can remember, we have had the very bad winter of 1999 when we had endemic influenza that caused significant disruption. It wasn't actually the millennium bug that caused us trouble. It was just a bog standard flu that put huge pressures on our health service. Then we've had the pandemic influenza in 2009. We've had an outbreak of Ebola in West Africa. Technically that went pandemic too because it did actually jump from continent to continent through travel. If you look back in history, you can see that on average we've had a significant outbreak every 23 years, and the only gaps in the history record where it doesn't seem to have been happening was when England was at war with the French, and then when England was at war with the Americans. Again, a bit of a pattern appearing here. And then when we were at war with everyone. So the chances are that there's actually been quite significant outbreaks in these interval periods too. It's just that we were somewhat distracted by high background mortality and high national displacement of people, that people just said, oh, there's a lot of disease because there's massive displacements of people. And that's actually a foreboding for the future, because if you have disruptions caused by global warming or mass migration, that in itself will bring disease and cause outbreaks of disease. So the next outbreak, it's going to happen, but we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what disease it's going to cause. Is it going to be a hemorrhagic fever? Is it going to be a respiratory fever? Could it actually be enteric disease that causes profuse diarrhea and dehydration and shock? So let's put it aside, it's going to happen. You're going to still need to have mass diagnostics developed. You're going to want to know how it's impacting on society. You're wanting to develop and test therapeutics. And you're going to want to understand what the sequelae of these diseases are. What are the long COVIDs or the post-Ebola syndromes? What do they look like? And so it seems to people like me that the need for rapid research capacity is clearly obvious. Now this cartoon shows you the situation in 2009 with pandemic influenza. With the exception of a study called FluSyn that was set up by Jonathan Van Tam, there was no meaningful characterization of the disease in the early stages of that outbreak. And FluSyn was done the hard way with paper case report forms being filled in by research nurses and medical students. There was no preclinical work done, that's taking the samples out of the patients into the laboratories, except by a study called Mosaic, run by Peter Openshaw out of Imperial College, London. And there was no trials at all, no registered clinical trials, or so I thought until I found that China had managed to run one randomized controlled trial with ethical committee approval towards the end of that outbreak. Now that's probably quite shocking for you, that in 2009, despite having a global pandemic, we have got no rigorous trial evidence to show us what antivirals work or whether convalescent plasma works, or what infection prevention control procedures are best for influenza. As a result of that, a group of like-minded people, including myself and Ken Bailey from Edinburgh, Jonathan Van Tam, Peter Openshaw in London, Peter Horby was involved, Jeremy Farrar was involved. That group put together an organisation called ISARIC, which is the International Severe Acute Respiratory and now Emerging Infection Consortium. It just happens ISARIC is Aramaic for the Brotherhood, which is a happy coincidence, but it does give a concept in operation of a group of people coming together with common purpose to deal with something in the future. We looked at the kind of research that you'd want to conduct in a pandemic, and much as a student of English literature will tell you that there's only 7 tropes in English literature, by which I mean boy meets girl under Civil moon and various variations of that, or hero slays dragon. These are the themes of the English literature trope. If you look at research in a pandemic, we think there's 4 tropes. There's the clinical characterization protocol that asks the question, the who, the what, and the why. Who's affected? What does the disease look like? Why is it happening? You've then got the drug trials, and ideally you want to do an adaptive platform. You want to do a convalescent plasma trial, and a convalescent plasma is so weird and different to drug trials because you have to get your convalescent survivors, you have to bleed them, make sure they're safe. So it doesn't fit comfortably into a drug trial. And then you've got your vaccine trial. So we looked at these 4 tropes. We decided vaccine trials were completely out of remit. You need to have built the vaccine, it's complicated. We couldn't do that. The convalescent plasma trial protocol, the drug trial, and the clinical characterization protocols, we then developed in our spare time using soft money, charitable donations sometimes. Many of us were criticised for spending time on this and going to meetings on this for something that wasn't going to happen for 20 years. In fact, I remember some uncomfortable PDRs and annual reviews where my work on this was quite severely criticised. We developed these protocols. We made sure that the components in the protocols were harmonised so that there was common outcome measures that could be clearly done. So we fixed on a 14-day and a 28-day survival. We thought about ventilator-free days as a common outcome measure. So important common outcome measures. The case report forms were designed to be agnostic to disease and age, because we thought if a research nurse needs to grab a case report form, she doesn't want to be thinking, oh, do I grab the viral hemorrhagic one? Do I grab the child one? Do I grab the respiratory one? No, we just made it nice and simple. And we then took the concept to ethics committees, and we started at the top. We went to the World Health Organization Ethical Committee, and they got it, they understood it. But it's a very unusual protocol, because the protocol didn't say Ebola or TB or influenza. It said any pathogen of public health interest. So it's totally agnostic to disease. And the other thing that we did that was quite smart, we think, was we wrote into the protocol the ability to do annual activations using a common disease such as community-acquired pneumonia, and to use that as a test activation at sites, just so that the protocol could be dusted off and used at a small number of sites so that people knew how to work it. The protocol had some other key features. It was tiered, it had a layer cake of activity. And that meant that trusts could choose which layer of activity they were comfortable with, which made it very inclusive. So the lowest tier of activity was just collect the data, just tell us who's been admitted, what age they are, what sex they are, what comorbidities they had, what drugs you gave them, and did they live or die? Perhaps what levels of care did they need? So just data. Tier 1 was if you've got anything left over from the residual diagnostic sample with consent, could you send it to us, or could you send it to Public Health England? So that's tier 1. Tier 2 was serial biological sampling, again with consent, but this would be purposeful. So we'd want a serum, a plasma, a urine, a stool, a throat swab, and a nasal swab, and a skin swab from a lesion. And we wanted it at admission, day 3, day 9, day 12, discharge. And the very top tier, this was designed for the sort of teaching hospitals that had clinical research facilities where they might be using experimental drugs, in which case could we have extra samples to do pharmacokinetic sampling. Now, we were then very lucky because there was a nasty avian influenza coming up through Egypt towards Europe. And Dame Sally Davis, who was the current CMO, got to hear about our protocol, and she realised that we didn't have any mechanism for characterising disease in the UK. And she, by edict, gave every hospital trust in England 72 hours to either accept or reject this protocol, by which means they had to put it through the R&D committee and get sign-off. And she gave them 72 hours to do it. And she put in her letter the contact number of a telephone number in the Department of Health for anyone who objected to phone up. And this was very clever, because one trust phoned up and said, oh, we can't do this, we're far too busy. And they ended up speaking to a senior clinical advisor who told them their future and their fortune, and they very quickly agreed that they would then sign up to this as well. So Dame Sally, by the stroke of a pen, made sure that we had R&D approval within 72 hours notice for this protocol. And it then stayed on the shelf as a preparedness protocol within the newly developed NIHR. And the NIHR then developed a portfolio of other urgent public health research programs, well, studies. And we stayed in there. The irony was that nobody had actually funded us. And we went to the MRC. We asked for £50,000 for 5 years. So that was £10,000 a year, just to pay for an administrator to keep our permissions and our ethics and things. And the quote we got back from the MRC, and you'll love this, was, "We can see no need for a protocol such as this in a future digitally connected NHS." Okay, so just leave that one with you. ISARIC really grew legs then. These protocols and the concept have been adapted and adopted now in 52 other networks of infectious disease doctors and intensivists in 133 countries. So ISARIC has really got quite big. The test activations we did in the UK, we decided we didn't need to do a test activation when there'd been a real activation, because it kind of made sense. So we ended up doing one in 2016 because people had got a bit sleepy and forgotten about what it was all about. In 2018, we activated for MERS and monkeypox and recruited 4 cases. And then in January 2020, we activated for coronavirus. And this is the first report that we sent in to NERVTAG and SAGE. At that point, we were commissioned, and the commission was to recruit 1,000 cases in wave 1 and 1,000 cases in any subsequent wave. But by the time we submitted our first report and before the award letter had actually been formally sent to us, we'd actually exceeded the commission, and Department of Health asked us just to keep going. And this is the kind of information that we could share. We could share the geography of the outbreak, the number of cases at a site. We could describe the characteristics on admission, the comorbidities. The plot at the bottom, which looks like a sort of this bit here. It's called a Sankey plotter and alluvial plot. This turned out to be incredibly useful. We hadn't realised how useful it would be, but it allowed the NHS to understand the disposition or placement of patients on the first day of admission and subsequent days of admission, and that let them understand what intensive care resources were being used. We were also able to describe the use of high flow oxygen, non-invasive ventilation and invasive ventilation. You'll see that there's rather less oxygen being used than you might imagine, and that's because the NHS is very poor at documenting oxygen when it's delivered by nasal cannula. So they tend to only document accurately high flow oxygen. And then on the right hand side, you can see the age distribution of cases, with the open circles being people that survived and the red circles being those that died. So even in the first 800 cases, the risk factors were becoming very clear. This is our current recruitment. We're currently up at 253,000 cases that we've characterised from 308 sites, and that's our Tier 0 activity. Our Tier 1 and Tier 2 activity brings samples in from, currently it was about 20 hospitals. We bring that into Glasgow and Liverpool, where we split the samples up and then send them out to other research units throughout the country. And that makes our research very much more efficient. So rather than take Birmingham recruiting Birmingham cases and Birmingham doing Birmingham's immunology on Birmingham's patients, we can recruit the patients from 20 odd hospitals, and it's about 2,500 samples, bring them into the 2 hubs in Glasgow and Liverpool, aliquot them into typically 10 units per sample, and then send these samples out to numerous researchers. The collaboration agreement insists that they then share the data that they generate back with us. We put that into a data analysis platform hosted in Edinburgh. And that means that rather than Birmingham just looking at Birmingham's patients with Birmingham's immunology, we can actually bring all 2,500 patients' data and look at the virology work that was done in Glasgow, the immunology from Birmingham, the cytokine work from Imperial, and bring it all together. And that makes for much more rapid and meaningful research. And it also makes for much bigger research outputs. And that's why the UK research response has been phenomenal, because the ISARIC study has facilitated really good units doing fantastic research. And it's been a very different paradigm, because normally these research groups would be quite covetous and not tell you what they're doing, hold on to their data, and then publish 50 cases in a flourish of press activity. And instead, we're seeing data and samples being shared and a much more coordinated research approach. And that's led to much bigger impact discoveries. And frankly, has knocked the rest of Europe and America completely out of the park. And and I'm going to go through some of these high impact publications shortly, and then keep it short so we can do questions at the end. So coming back to the real value of the clinical coalface rather than the glory of research. On the 10th of March, this is the very early days of the outbreak. It was mentioned in SAGE, and I wasn't a member of SAGE at that time, that nosocomial transmission was being recognised within the NHS. It was recognised that doctors and nurses were catching COVID far more commonly than the population. And at the same time, I had a conversation with the data manager, and she was saying to me that there's a problem with these research nurses, just can't get the staff. They're filling in the symptom onset date after the admission date. What can we do to get them to fill in case report forms correctly? Now, the nurses amongst you will realise that they weren't making a mistake at all. They were filling in the forms absolutely correctly. These were people that were coming in with heart attacks and strokes and broken legs, catching COVID and developing symptoms in hospital. And we were able, therefore, in the ISARIC COSIN study, to quantify the problem and identify it even by location. So these are the graphs that went to SAGE on the 2nd of April. So it's not often that a commissioner in a high-level government committee can say, we've got a problem, let's do some research on it. And 2 weeks later, you've got the definitive answer coming back. That is a very different paradigm to commission research and publish 2 years later. So within 2 weeks, our study was answering that question. And we were saying, you've got a problem, it's much bigger than you think it is. And we can tell you which trusts it's a really big problem in. And you need to think about this and do something about it. And as a direct action, Patrick Vallance directed that a nosocomial transmission subgroup will be co-chaired by the National Infection Service nursing and NHS Nursing Director, and it will meet twice weekly and it will start immediately. And that's why when people criticise SAGE and the government processes, I would say actually Britain did pretty well, because they put in place mechanisms for collecting data and acting on that data in a very rapid style. So your NHS and your DHSC, I think, have actually done quite well. And that has to be separated from policy decisions in the larger context. I think your clinical leadership has actually been outstanding. This is a later analysis, but it's the same data, and it's the same data that we shared with government at an early stage. On the left-hand panel, as you're looking at it, you'll see the solid blocks giving you the shape of the pandemic, and then the red dots with confidence intervals showing the proportion of nosocomial hospital-acquired COVID throughout the NHS. We used the CQC reports, which describe the major activity for each trust. Now, it's not perfect because some trusts have got mixed activity, it is possible to identify from a CQC report what the major business of a given trust is, whether it's acute and general care with maternity services, whether it's specialised commission services, whether it's mental health, or whether in Wales particularly, it's intensive nursing care in the community. And we were able to show that, as it isn't particularly a surprise, those places that have got long-term care facilities will have higher nosocomial transmission rates because patients are in them for longer. So that's a bit of a no-brainer. But if you look at the solid blocks, which are on the bottom right, these are your acute and general hospitals. And you can see that there's really not a good relationship between busyness, which is the number of patients they care for, and the degree of nosocomial infection. In fact, there's some very big, very busy trusts that maintained incredibly low levels of hospital-acquired infection, and others which are quieter and really you'd have thought should be able to contain the outbreak where there was high rates. And that's currently subject to further research. And this data was shared on a regional and individual trust basis. Other things our study did, we managed to use the early material that we collected at the start of the outbreak, and rather than doing research on it ourselves, we actually sent samples from the first 400 patients to NIBS to make international standards, and to Oxford to validate the vaccine that's been developed, and also to Porton Down to validate the tests. So it was our study which allowed the tests to be developed, the vaccine to be validated, and international standards to be developed. Now, I'm just going to come right back to the start again. This was all done the hard way. This was done with 2,648 research nurses and medical students going around taking consent and collecting blood samples. This was the NHS at its best, and that's how the Chadox vaccine was validated. That's how most of the PCR tests were validated, and it was done in the UK by ULOT, and it's fantastic. I'm running out of time, so we'll whiz through a few of these slides. I've said that we developed the vaccine. The other work we did, which was quite interesting, was compare children to adults and show that the symptom clusters between adults and children were very, very different. We also identified that enteric disease, that's gastrointestinal disease, was more frequent in children but occurred in adults too, leading to misclassification. So about 5% of your adults that came into hospital with COVID did not have cough, fever, and difficulty in breathing. Instead, they had abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting and diarrhea. And that meant 5% of your patients were misclassified, went to open wards, typically went to surgical take, and then spread COVID throughout the hospital too. And that's actually be very difficult to do anything about at the early phase, because we wouldn't have known that that was COVID, and we didn't have a test. Okay, I'm going to whiz through now because I think it'd be much more fun to take some questions. We're going to say the one other thing that you'll come across, I hope, in your clinical practice is the 4C mortality score, and that's now used globally as a way of predicting which patients are at risk of death. And again, that was developed through your hard efforts collecting data for this study. There we are. Lots of big papers in big journals. Last slide. So that was the problem in 2009. This is what we've achieved. The clinical characterization protocol was ready at the start. We recruited the first cases when they came into York and were admitted to Newcastle. The very first cases were enrolled in this study and sampled. We were able to deliver preclinical research. That's what Ken Bailey has led on in Edinburgh using our samples. And Peter Horby, who I mentioned earlier, has led the recovery trial. And all of them are members of ISARIC, and between us have really facilitated the research response in the UK. And it just leaves me to thank all of you for all your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Calum Semple OBE. It was really fascinating to hear about how you've actually been involved in, well, you've been involved in this area for a long time before. And I guess many of us may not have really realised that all this stuff was going on in the background, and then when everything happened, stepping in and just getting everything going and making sure that it can actually give us the data that we actually need to then make decisions. So thank you so much for the work that you've been doing. What I would like to do is now take to the audience for some questions. I'm sure you've got some burning questions that you might want to ask. So if you can put your hands up, that would be absolutely fantastic. And I'll just get you warmed up by asking a question that I was really interested in myself. I work in addictions, so we have a lot of public health and we have a lot of issues in terms of addictions and how we look at the research and the data, and then how do we get the politicians to actually listen to us to make decisions that then actually help patients and their family members and improve and enhance public health and addictions. So what I want to ask you is, how do you get the politicians, the big people who are running our country, to actually look at your data, to actually be able to understand what you've put, and then to actually understand what you're recommending, and how do you then get them to do, I suppose, what you want them to do rather than what they want to do? So that's a question for you, please.
It's a lovely question, and the answer is a bit like Margaret Thatcher said, everybody needs a Willie. Everybody needs a Chris Whitty or a Patrick Vallance. And the SAGE members and Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance have to maintain a high degree of trust so that it's felt that our discussions are confidential, not shared with the press before they're shared with ministers. So you have to develop trust. And you have to present, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance present our findings in a very dispassionate manner. They present them as often a series of options, saying this is the implication of what if you make this choice, this is what the science says. If you make that choice, this is what the science says. Sometimes it's a buffet of options, but sometimes it's a set of options where it is explained that it's not a buffet. This is simply the impact of doing A, B, and C only gives you the correct answer if you do all of A, B, and C. And if you choose to do A and C, the leakage from B will not work. So lockdowns, which are only partial, which leave leakage for people to meet up in Costa or meet up at the school gates, doesn't have the same effect as a complete lockdown. So a lot of it is around explaining these nuances. But SAGE itself is kept away from the politicians. We take essentially exam questions through Patrick and Chris that come to SAGE. So it's what would be the impact, or what is the likely impact, or what is the likely impact of this variant. We give scenarios or forecasts or data, and it's for them, as Patrick and Chris, to take to the politicians. And we actually don't get feedback. We're kept quite sterile from it.
Okay, thank you. Some tips there for anyone that wants to enhance or badger the politicians. So I've got a question over here from John. If you'd like to introduce yourself and just say where you're, we've got a roving mic. John, I've just got one over here. Sorry, and then we'll.
Just like Cilla Black.
And if you could just say who you are and where you're working or.
Hello, I'm John Turgoose. I lead the data team at the Hull Health Trials Unit, part of the Hull York Medical School based at the university. I'm just interested, fascinating talk, thank you so much for it, just on the sort of the logistics as someone who's obviously setting up trials, setting up the data systems, etc., etc. As I understand it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you collected the data on paper CRFs, is that right? Did you then get the sites to enter that into an electronic system, or were they then posting that in and you had sort of a factory of people entering data into a database? Can you just talk through a little sort of the logistics?
Most sites did it the hard way, collecting onto paper CRFs and then handed the CRFs to admin people in the R&D office who typed it into a web-based portal. Some places had electronic healthcare record systems, and they did it screen by screen straight into the REDCap instance. And we set up the REDCap instance, which is our data portal, to mirror the paper CRF. So essentially, it was like a paper CRF on screen. A very few sites took the time to build electronic capture systems using tablets, so that they used an electronic version of the CRF that was designed to go straight into the red cap, but that was their own efforts to do that. A couple of trusts did direct data upload from their electronic healthcare record systems. That was not successful. That was not particularly successful. It should have been, but it wasn't, because the systems just aren't built for that.
So it's just like, so the underlying system was RedCap?
The backbone was RedCap, and we started off with one instance, and we ended up with 12 instances of RedCap, one for each region, because again, RedCap does not handle large data sets. It doesn't handle very large data sets well. Once it gets up to about 80,000 records, it slows down. And you've got 2,500 people logging onto it to upload.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I've got one last question. Thank you.
Oh, John's got some questions too. I know I'm going to let John have a question at the end.
Oh, hello, I'm Jackie White. I'm a mental health nurse academic. I lead mental health strategy at the University of Hull, and I'm also a partner governor of the Humber Trust. I'm really interested, it's fascinating talk, and what interested me was the collaboration and how you had this threat that really mobilised. It sounded like the collaboration and the interdisciplinary working, but we already have that infrastructure in place. I know this because I used to be a research nurse many moons ago. So I'm interested in what learning can be taken for that, for other things where perhaps the threat isn't seen as imminent as the pandemic. I think there was a bit of a hint in what you said in terms of how we operated compared to other countries in Europe and America. And I wonder if more could be made of that, because we've got this infrastructure, and it's a shame that it took a threat for so much collaboration to take place. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
The infrastructure of the Comprehensive Research Nurse Network throughout the UK is brilliant, and has to be cherished as much as the NHS. I think the NHS is going through turmoil, but the Comprehensive Research Network did work. The solutions that each area came up with worked better than anything that could be directed from the centre. So I think the smartness of the Comprehensive Research Network is that they all have models for delivering research best in their environment, because they know their local environment. They know whether it's mental health heavy or community heavy or acute trust heavy, and they've developed research networks. There was a resistance initially that research nurses that worked in the cardiothoracic unit and said, no, I'm the cardiothoracic research nurse. I've been funded by the British Heart Foundation for the last 5 years. I don't want to go to the paediatric unit, to go to the intensive care unit. There was some resistance initially, but that quickly went. And I'm now seeing research nurses, ironically, actually mental health research nurses who come to mind, who've been involved in the vaccine studies. And they said, oh, we only did mental health research until COVID. But now I've done this, I feel quite happy I could go and do any research, because the generic skills of consent and communication and blood drawing, they could do anywhere. So I think that's to be cherished and built upon.
And maybe publicised, because I doubt the general public really understand about that. About that network is there, and I think that would be a good thing to
I think within the
about.
nursing, I think within the nursing and caring professions, it needs to be understood. A lot of people going into nursing and physiotherapy say, "Oh, I don't want to do research. It's threatening." They feel it's very threatening, and they don't realise that unless somebody had done research 2 years ago, they wouldn't be using the right drug or the right ventilator or the right respiratory clearance technique. And if I had my way, just as you have to do a mandatory fire lecture at the start of your employment, I would want every nurse and physiotherapist to do the very first part of the GCP training, just so that they understand that Humber NHS, what's the title? Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. They say, right, oh, so we teach. So teaching's part of what we do. And actually, research is part of what we do. It's not, research is something that office over there does. It's care is what we do. If you want to care well, you want to use up-to-date care, then if you want to be up-to-date, someone's got to be doing the research, and that's probably going to be all of us. Go on, John. John wants to ask me what was the biggest lie that was told.
I do want to ask you what the biggest lie was told, but before we go to that, you describe a torturous journey of you and your collaborators howling at the moon in order to get people to buy into the possibility that you need to set up this research framework. So with that in mind, if we were giving you £1 million today in a COVID context, what would you choose to research and why? That's my first question, and then we'll come to the big lie.
Okay. I would put some of that £1 million into maintaining the infrastructure that was required so that, again, if we had 2 weeks notice, we could do this again. And what is disappointing is that because of the comprehensive spending review and because of the state of the nation, the funding to maintain that and is not apparent, I think is the polite way of putting it. So I think that it would be quite easy to be in a very difficult situation in a few years' time. So I put some of the money aside for that. What would I research? You're trying to guess where the next one is coming from. I think I would want to understand better what are the diseases that are affecting people where there's mass forced movement of people. I think that's going to be a big threat, because I think displacement of people is going to be a problem. And then there's lots of people looking at the effects of climate and how climate change could either change the mosquitoes or the midges and the water temperature, and how that could alter our disease. So I think a One Health approach to future outbreaks is essential. And I think we need to look more at displaced human populations as a potential for the next pandemic.
So the second question, then we'll move on to the big lie. And I think my observation is that over the last 20 months, we've had to watch an awful lot of people sit on couches and TV studios, postulate a lot of tosh, basically. Now, you clearly have earned the right through academics and knowledge to consider yourself to be an expert and review the data. So with that in mind, looking back over the past 20 months, what do you think the biggest lie has been during the pandemic?
Okay, so this will probably go onto YouTube. I think the biggest lie is to say we're following the science. And that's not because of deliberate obfuscation. Science is messy. It is not black and white, it's grey, it's nuanced. If you do a clinical trial of a vaccine and you recruit people aged between 20 and 65 with no underlying comorbidities, then your vaccine trial results are only going to be generalizable in that population. And it then becomes very hard to be certain of what is the effect of that vaccine in people aged between 60 and 90, who are your high-risk group. So the biggest lie is when you hear someone saying we're following the science, as if that's to cut off debate, or it's either suggesting if this goes right, I'm going to say, well, I was awfully good, I followed the science, I'm a good chap. If it goes wrong, let's throw the scientists under the bus because it was their fault, we took their advice. So what I think should be said is we've listened carefully to the best scientific advice that we could get. And on the basis of that, we've made this decision, taking into account the wider impact on society and that there's some uncertainty in the science. I think that's a less comfortable soundbite, but we shouldn't be having a us and them approach to this is what the science says, this is what we've done, and that's it.
So I think time will tell if that goes up on YouTube or not, but I think it's a very nuanced response to what was, apologies, a very binary question. Chair, do we have time for one more question?
You can have one more question.
One more question. So we in this organisation have been vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds over the past couple of weeks with our risk-based service, done about 520 children and young people. There are a lot of vaccine hesitant people out there, parents, less so I think the children and young people. From your clinical experience as working in paediatrics, is there anything you can say to anyone who's either in the audience today or watching at home who has a teenager or a young person in their house who hasn't been vaccinated yet?
Yes, it is my heartfelt belief, based on both experience and looking at the data, COVID is a very nasty disease. It has a myriad of ways of making us miserable and sick. And from all the data I've seen and all the reports I've seen, the vaccine is safer than the virus. The immune response to the vaccine is targeted in a way that is highly protective and causes very few side effects, whereas experiencing the virus, if you survive and if you're not harmed by it, gives you some immunity, but that immunity is not particularly well targeted against the parts of the virus which the vaccine is targeted against, and gives you a much better immunity. So it is not a case that the wild type virus is a better immunization. So
no to herd immunity then? No comment.
No, you want to achieve herd immunity ideally through vaccination and not through natural exposure. And any farmer will tell you that herd immunization is why they get herd immunity. And my eldest daughter's a vet. You don't want to get herd immunity through exposure to disease and lose the quality of your herd. Neither do we want to achieve that with our population.
Probably the key message today. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Calum Semple OBE. Put your hands together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to say, please do keep sending your tweets into hashtag Humber Research 2021, and please do use the Q&A function. We've got questions coming in, and we will be answering questions that we can't answer now later if possible. So thank you very much. I would now like to introduce Dr. Chris Sanderson and Sian Carr. So Dr. Chris Sanderson is a clinical psychologist and works at the NHS Trust. And Sian Carr is a social coach at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. And they are both talking about the SCENE trial, promoting social networks for people diagnosed with psychosis. So please, can you put your hands together for Chris and Sian? Thank you very much.
So good morning, everyone. I worked in Humber as a clinical psychologist until just recently, and actually just moved to Ardash to try and get out of this presentation. But they tracked me down in North Lincolnshire. No, I'm only joking. It's great to be here and to talk about something I'm really passionate about. So we're going to talk a little bit about SCENE, which stands for a randomised control trial of a structured intervention for expanding social networks in psychosis. And this is a trial that's ongoing, and we're going to talk a bit about our experience of being involved as local clinicians. So just as a bit of background, this might be familiar to many of you, but psychosis is a bit of an umbrella term, and it refers to the experience of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling or feeling things that other people might not experience. And although that can be more common than you think in society, the people we see in the NHS tend to be really distressed by those experiences. You can also refer to people holding strong beliefs that other people don't share, or difficulties thinking, concentrating, and other people might appear low or withdrawn. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I'd recommend the reference at the bottom of this page. So coming on to SCENE, what was the problem that this study was trying to address? Well, we know that people who are diagnosed with psychosis are often social isolated, and this can happen even before their first experience or their first episodes. And we know that social isolation it's important for everybody, but if we look at it for people diagnosed with psychosis, it's associated with really poor outcomes. And currently in the NHS, although things are improving and there's lots of kind of good treatments are offered, we know that these don't really have, or don't necessarily have, an effect on increasing social contacts. So the research questions for the SCENE trial were, first of all, can you do something to increase social contacts? And secondly, can increasing social contacts make a difference for those people diagnosed with psychosis and an impact on their quality of life? So just to put it in a bit of a diagram, the SCENE intervention at the top tries to improve social contacts. Can we increase people's social activity? and then testing out this idea or the hypothesis that by doing that it's going to improve people's quality of life, and that's going to have a knock-on effect on people's outcomes. So will it reduce their symptoms, reduce their distress, and reduce hospitalisation? So this slide here kind of talks over how the study was kind of run. So we've been recruiting people in Humber. I'd say lots of really grateful to the research team who made it as easy as possible for local clinicians to refer through. Once people were kind of gave their consent to take part in the trial, they filled in various different questionnaires about their clinical history, about their social activities, about their quality of life and their loneliness. And then they were allocated randomly to either one of two conditions. So there was the treatment group, which Sian's going to talk about her experience of being one of the therapists, or in the trial they call it a social contact coach. And this was 6 monthly appointments, taking a kind of psychological approach based on motivational interviewing and brief solution-focused therapy aimed at increasing people's social contacts. Or people were allocated to the control group, where they didn't have any contact with a social contact coach, and instead they were given a booklet that provided information about activities in their local area. And then afterwards, we repeat the questionnaires at the start of 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months. So I think the study started about 6 months before the first COVID lockdown. And understandably, for a study that's aiming at increasing social contacts, a global pandemic doesn't really go along with that, where the thing you want people to do is reduce their social contacts. So I think it's pretty impressive what the research team did, to the national research team, to keep the study going. Is first of all, they changed the way meetings were facilitated. So went from face-to-face to telephone or video conferencing. They also included new questions, so questions about the effect of lockdown. How does that have an effect on people's loneliness, quality of life, mental health? Our colleagues at the University of York created new booklets as well that had activities that were either online or that involved activities where there could be safe distancing. And the social contact coaches supported people to think about access, computer literacy, infection control, and physical distancing. So say it's a multi-site trial, and it's going on all over the country. And so far, we've recruited 469 out of 600 participants, and 28 of those have been from Humber. I think we had an initial target of 20, so a kind of smaller trust, but still pretty impressive. 13 of those have gone into intervention and 15 into control group. And I think another great thing about this study is we've trained at least 11, could be more now, social contact coaches in the intervention, and hopefully that has a knock-on effect on the work that we do in local services. Let's pass over to Sian.
Thank you, Chris. So a little bit of a height difference, but hopefully you can see me over this. So I'm going to start then by giving you a bit of an overview of the programme. So alongside being a social contact coach, I'm also an assistant psychologist with the Hull Community Mental Health teams, so jumbling the two together. So each participant that I worked with was offered 6 sessions over a 6-month period. The first 2 sessions were a little bit longer, so these lasted roughly an hour each. And within that time, we worked together to put a timetable of their activities across their lifespan. So I'll come to that shortly. So it was important to have those first 2 sessions a little bit longer so we could get to know each other and find out what they wanted support with. So following that then, sessions 3 to 6, these follow-up sessions were a little bit shorter, so roughly 20 minutes, but sometimes we would go over depending on how chatty the participant was. And then once they've completed the programme, I'd send them an ending letter. So this was a really important part of the programme because the ending letter had lots of positive highlights to show the successes and the progress that they've made since starting the intervention. And I'd include links and things in there so they could keep the activity rolling and keep that momentum flowing. So here's an example of an activities timeline that I put together with one of the participants. So we'd start right from the beginning. So what did they used to do when they were younger? What kind of hobbies and interests did they have? And did they enjoy these as well? Because sometimes there might be activities that we're involved in, but it's not something that we're enjoying. And our interests do change over time. So then we'd look right to now, just to see what they're doing at the moment. And this was a really useful resource for them to have, so they could reference when they're at home, just to kind of see, is there anything on there that they want to pick up again and get back into, or anything that they can adapt a little bit. And I tried to make this as colourful as possible so they could pin it up at home if they wanted to. Right, so just considering a few challenges that I faced. So the first one being the COVID restrictions and lockdowns. So we had resource booklets and handouts for participants of different activities, and some of these did change and were paused for quite a while. So we had to really be flexible here and kind of adapt what we could offer them, and do that little bit of extra research to find what activities were safe for them to get involved in. And then there was also sometimes the problem of non-engagement, which you'd expect really. Working in mental health, sometimes that happens. So all my appointments were over the phone with clients. So sometimes they might miss appointments, or we might have a little bit of miscommunication and they might be busy at that time. So just trying to work around that. And actually during one intervention with one participant, they were sectioned halfway through. So at that point, we paused the sessions. Weekly scene support group, which was over MS Teams, just to seek some advice and get some ideas of what we can do there. So it was agreed to encourage this participant to continue. So when they were back home and when they were off the unit, I'd sent them a letter saying, just get back in touch whenever you're ready and we can pick it up. And they did do, so that was great. So we managed to overcome these challenges here, but they were quite tricky at times. So looking at successes then, so there was quite a lot, so I've just put a little bit of a summary here, some of the key activities that participants got involved in. So lots of active things, lots of sporty activities, so things like cycling, getting stuck in with yoga classes, walking dogs. So when you're out walking a dog, there's a lot of people that you can bump into, that you can have a chat with. Going to cricket matches is another example. Playing football is quite a popular one. Volunteering opportunities popped up as well. So that gave some participants something a little bit more structured, so they could maybe factor that in and to have that opportunity once a week. And they could build that into their routine. If they were quite creative, then they could get stuck in with art workshops and other creative things, as well as groups that may be lined in with their goals. So one participant joined Slimming World, and that group was now up and running again. So it had been online, but now they're sort of moving back towards face-to-face. So they were able to go and try that out. So these activities that they got involved with helped them to meet new people, interact more with the public. And then some participants also reconnected with old friends and just their extended family members. So just back to Chris.
So we can't really share any of the results. It's an ongoing study, but we can share some of our reflections of being involved in the trial. So I think it comes back to some of the discussion points in the last presentation about local clinicians being involved in research. And to be honest, when I was doing some of the training, it was a bit nerve-wracking to be involved, and it looked like quite a lot of responsibility. It was the first time I'd ever been a principal investigator. I'm not just saying this because it's the research conference, but the support from the research team was fantastic. And to be honest, it was a relatively easy process for me, because I think most of that was great support from Emma Anderson. But it was a great learning experience for me as well, to help to build my confidence in research and my kind of knowledge. And it's also something I thought was really important. So I guess I came into this kind of work to try and make a difference. And I saw that research in this area, promoting social approaches for this population, is something that I'm really passionate about. And hopefully in a small way, by being part of this research, it helped for local people to be involved and to shape future understandings and interventions. And I'm really proud that lots of local clinicians got trained up in an intervention as well. Hopefully that will have a knock-on effect. So yeah, I'm really passionate about being involved again, and I'd encourage anybody else who is interested to make contact with the research team and to get involved.
Okay, so just to conclude with a few of my sort of key reflections as well from being a social contact coach. So the top one being that this study has really highlighted to me how important social activity is for mental health. And I think we've all felt that when we've not been able to be as social as we'd like, that can make us feel quite low, isolated, and we need to be social. We thrive when we're with other people. So really encouraging participants here as much as we can, just to pick up activities and to get stuck in with things that they enjoy is really important. And then I also think that the more support we can offer at this level in the community is likely just to see benefits in terms of reducing relapse rates. So if we can help people feel less isolated, lift their mood, get them out meeting new people and enjoying their life, then we're going to see some real benefits there. And personally, I've really enjoyed being involved in this piece of research alongside my role as an assistant psychologist. It's been really feasible and easy to manage alongside my schedule. And I'd encourage anybody who works in the Humber Trust or wider just to get stuck in with research. And this team have loads of other projects on the go, so just contact and get involved. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much to Chris and to Sian. That was absolutely brilliant. And I think it really showed how you kind of overcome all the challenges during COVID to actually do this brilliant intervention, helping people connect and actually get better engaged in their own lives and enjoy their lives and their recovery. So thank you. Is there any questions for the audience? I've got Caroline, I think we're going to have a microphone coming to you. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just saying.
Hi, I'm Caroline Flint. I'm the Trust Chair for Humber Teaching NHSFT. So I think it's really interesting around social networks. Now, for a lot of people, increasingly their social network is online. It's through a space which is virtual, which for some people they may feel safer in, particularly making new contacts. But also it can be, as we know, something that can be quite closed as well. Are you looking to do any research into the impact of those social networks and qualifying it against some of the things you've talked about around going to football matches, going on to walks, about the sort of qualitative worth of one over the other to help guide how you support people for whom actually increasingly most of what we do we're expected to do online. Lots of the public services we use are wanting us to do more online, whether it's the tax office or whether it's the benefit service or whether it's the NHS. And some of the impacts on that in terms of social connections and interaction.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So I guess we're not planning ourselves on doing the research, but I know the research team are interviewing participants about their experience of the trial and the intervention, and some of that kind of qualitative interview may help to pick up on those subtle differences. And certainly that's an issue. Clinically, we know that we've been offering lots of interventions online, and that's fantastic for those people who can access it, but there's clearly a proportion of the population, or quite a significant proportion of the population, who can't really access online methods. I do think it's an interesting point to compare the kind of experience of online social activities compared to kind of traditional in-person, and what people get from both of those.
Thank you so much. That's great. Can I thank yourselves today? Thank you very much. And also thank Professor Calum as well, and all the presentations so far. I think it's really made us think about research and putting it into context, and actually really all the benefits you've talked about, but as people and as healthcare workers, but also all the benefits that we can take from getting that that data and then putting it into practice. It's more likely to happen if we're all involved in research. So I'm going to give everyone a 5-minute break. Sorry, we have run over a little bit, and we'll come back in 5 minutes, and then we'll have the next session. Thank you very much. Hello everyone. I'm going to start bringing everyone back so we can come back from the break. I appreciate the cakes have just arrived. Have we started? We're not recording yet, are we? Or and I hope you had a good break. And sorry, it wasn't as long as we probably would like. It's just one of these events, isn't it, that we've not all been together for a long time. So it's so nice to see everyone and see everyone's faces and just have a chat. I'm just going to read out some of the comments that have been coming through, just so everyone who's online is getting involved. So we've got thank you, Castle Hill, Queen Centre Castle Hill, well said, and that was for the presenters, and asking about, are the 16-year-olds still getting double jabs? So we'll find out later. And then we've got more comments coming through, some really, how do you contact the research team at Humber, please? So the simplest way is to go via the email system at the research team at nhs.net, and everyone can see that on the comments too. And more questions for the panelists, so we'll be doing that just at the end before we finish. So how do you feel this links in with social prescribing? We've got people saying very interesting talk on mental health and research, thank you. Another great presentation, absolutely fantastic. And we have Laura has said about the COVID pandemic has exposed the impact of social inequalities on our ability to manage pandemics. So really, really important, and thank contributions and questions that have come in. So thank you, everyone. We are back again for our 5th annual research conference, Developing a City of Research, for the Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust, and I'm Soraya Mayet, and I'm going to now hand over to our next speaker, and that is Dr. Hannah Ahmet, and she is a senior clinical research psychologist at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. And Dr. Hannah is going to let us know about a dose of nature, researching how green and blue spaces can benefit mental and physical health. So I think we all need to know a bit more about that. So thank you very much. Can you please put your hands together for Hannah?
Yeah, so thank you everybody. Good morning. As Soraya said, I'm here to talk about how green and blue space, that's nature, wildlife, the outdoors, can impact positively on our mental and physical health. So just a little bit of information about me first. I've got a couple of roles. So I'm a clinical research psychologist. I work in the research and development departments. I also work clinically, and my specialism is child and adolescent mental health and neurodevelopmental conditions, so autism assessment, working in CAMHS. I'm also clinical lead for the Humber Coast and Vale Green Social Prescribing Programme, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the presentation. So I'm going to outline some of the kind of existing research evidence around green and blue space, then talk about some of the work I'm doing at a national level, so that's the Green Social Prescribing Programme, and then kind of at a local level, so that's looking at some public and patient representative work that I've done, PPI work. And just drawing your attention to the pictures here, I kind of did want to bring it to life a bit. I know we're all in a conference hall, but just to put some pictures here around how I get my daily dose of nature. So working at home, kind of being in a little office, I'm sure a lot of people realise it gets a little bit boring, a little bit isolated. So just getting out and about near my house. So this is Bootham in York. Just kind of walking along there, looking at the autumn leaves. Picture of the tansy beetle there. So I don't know if you know, but York's one of the only places you can see the tansy beetle. So on the banks of the River Ouse. Really nice thing to go and do in the summer, go and spot them. And then sunset in kind of a local park. So again, as it's getting so dark, just getting out and making sure you get that fresh air. So just some kind of previous research to show why this is such an important and interesting area, I suppose. So we know there's now clear and consistent evidence that exposure, so being in green and blue spaces, is associated with mental health benefits at both population level and in individuals. And I guess this is nothing new. So if you think back to the kind of Victorians, they quite frequently took the air, went on promenades, kind of bathed in the waters. So this isn't anything particularly new. However, the research is really focusing on this now and thinking about how we can harness this in terms of healthcare. So this is a study by Coventry et al. So this is one of my colleagues that I work quite closely with at the University of York. And in a recent meta-analysis that they did, they found that nature-based group activities for just 20 to 90 minutes over 8 to 12 weeks can have significant health and wellbeing benefits. So actually not much time over a short period can have a really positive effect on your mental health in terms of reducing anxiety, increasing positive effect and decreasing negative effect. And then the title of the presentation is the University of Exeter study, and they suggested a 2-hour dose of nature each week, again, can have significant mental health and wellbeing benefits. So not talking about kind of being out and active every single day, just getting those little walks at lunchtime at the end of the day, having some fresh air can have a significant benefit to your mental health. And again, just a chance to show off some of my photos. That's kind of how I like to get out and I suppose pay attention, because I think it can be quite easy to go out and walk around looking at your phone. But if you're actually noticing things, kind of small details as well as big scenes, I think it can actually make you feel more connected. This button's sticky, sorry. So I think we've all talked about the COVID pandemic and what a massive impact this has had on our mental and physical health. I know personally during the lockdowns, that kind of daily dose of exercise, being able to get out and about really helped me. And kind of to do with the pandemic, there's been a lot of research into, kind of mental health, getting out and about. And this paper by Natural England, which I think we're going to tweet as well, is really interesting. It's looking at kind of how behaviour change, people's behaviour changed over the COVID pandemic. And we saw that actually people accessed natural spaces much more frequently. And also the types of spaces people were accessing were very different. So I suppose pre-pandemic, you might have got in your car, drove quite a way to like a local national park or, kind of one of the bigger spaces. Whereas during the pandemic, we couldn't do that. So it was kind of about exploring those little urban green spaces near your home and just kind of making the most of what was around you. So gardens, balconies, anything. And they also found that really strong link when they looked at all the evidence to mental health benefits of nature during the pandemic, and really importantly, particularly in lower income households. So Natural England reported that health and exercise is the main reason that people report for kind of getting out and about. So interestingly as well, though, they also said that actually nature connectedness is needed to support health and well-being. So I suppose if you go out and kind of just put your headphones in, you're on a run. I know when I'm on a run, personally, I'm not taking anything and I just want to be home with a cup of tea. That's kind of not enough. You need to be connected. You need to be taking it in. You need to be noticing those little things, being mindful. And then moving on to kind of how is this relevant then? So we've got this brilliant evidence base. That's just a couple of the papers. There's absolutely tons out there if you kind of Google benefits of nature on mental health and well-being. Well, thinking about kind of policy and practice and implementation, it's how can we harness these wonderful free resources essentially that we know can have such a massive impact on mental health. So World Health Organization says that when we're thinking about health promotion, we need to be thinking about activities that promote people's access to green spaces, to increasing access for everybody so that we can all benefit from this. And I think that probably is relevant to service planning as well, kind of when we're designing inpatient units, is the green spaces, it kind of covers everything. Social prescribing I'm going to talk to you about in a bit, but it's also linked into the kind of NHS's long-term plan about community-based support. So how can we utilise all the wonderful voluntary sector organisations we've got, around the region, around the country? How can we ensure that people's kind of communities support their mental health? And that obviously includes increasing access to green and blue space. This isn't just adults, this is very much in children as well. So kind of when you look at systematic reviews of all the evidence, it suggests that for child and adolescents, increasing accessibility and quality of green space is really, really crucial. And I suppose it's kind of obvious, isn't it? You know, in terms of being able to play, being able to be physically active, all the skills they need to develop, you know, it's really important that they have access to quality green space. And I think that's probably becoming less and less. If you think of your own areas where you live, I know that when I go back home, there's more housing estates on fields that I used to play on. It's very much changing, so it's important to preserve those spaces. And that's kind of the challenge, I suppose, in research when I'm looking at kind of what are the next things that we need to look at is generating kind of quality evidence around what are the types of green spaces that are important for people and how can they be best utilised. So moving on to talk about the programme that I'm involved in at a national level. So this is the Humber Coast and Vale Green Social Prescribing Programme. So this isn't just about research, it's kind of around implementation, it's about service evaluation. There's a lot of parts to this that I'll go on to talk about, but research is definitely underpinning why the government have funded this programme, because they've seen all that evidence about how, you know, valuable green and blue spaces, and thought, right, how can we use this in healthcare? How can we harness this? So I keep on mentioning green and blue space. It's quite obvious what it is. Blue spaces are your coast, your rivers, lakes, and then green spaces is just gardens, fields, forests. So green social prescribing links people to nature-based and outdoor activities. And lots of pictures there. It's kind of anything, and our definition in Humber Coast and Vale is quite broad. So any kinds of groups, activities where you're out and about, that's what we're talking about. Oh, sorry. So just to explain a little bit more about the programme, it's a national programme. It's being funded by lots of government organisations. So we've got Natural England, NHS England, DEFRA, Sport England. So they kind of put a lot of money into green social prescribing and said, right, we want to know how does this work. So there's 7 test and learn sites around the country, and Humber Coast and Vale is one of those. So the programme's been delivered by Smile on behalf of the Humber Coast and Vale Care Partnership. And if you can just see the map there, it's divided into 6 places. So the East Riding and Hull are 2 of the places. We've got North Lincolnshire, North East Lincolnshire, Vale of York and North Yorkshire. So a massive geographic footprint, loads and loads of absolutely amazing green and blue spaces. We've got the beautiful Yorkshire coast, we've got 2 national parks, and absolutely hundreds of voluntary organisations that are kind of working to provide people with those opportunities to engage in activity outside. And the kind of priorities for this programme are to embed green social prescribing into communities. Firstly, kind of let everybody know what it is, and then ideally improve mental health outcomes, reduce health inequalities, reduce demand on the health and social care system, and develop best practice in making green social activities more resilient and accessible. So quite a big ask for a 2-year programme. But yeah, there's already an awful lot happening, and us as the programme team, we're kind of meeting with people on the ground. We're trying to understand what's already happening and then trying to link that into kind of NHS services. So from kind of IAP to primary care, CMHTs, what's already happening in terms of helping patients access green activity and what more could be done. Essentially, that's the kind of wider remits. And just to say kind of a little bit more about, I mentioned what social prescribing is for people who don't know. Essentially say you went to your GP, you said you were feeling quite anxious, quite low, quite isolated, you know, didn't particularly want to try medication, wanted to try something else. Your GP might say, I'm going to refer you to the social prescribing service. You'd meet with a link worker, and then they'd have a discussion with you about kind of what your interests are, what the difficulties are, and it's essentially a non-medical prescription. So they might say to you, do you know that round the corner from you at your local park, there's this wonderful voluntary group, they meet every week, it will give you the chance to meet new people, you've told me you like gardening, you know, it's really active, and you know, they'd send you that way, and then they'd kind of monitor you and see how that goes. So some of the questions, and I think this is obviously where the kind of research element comes in. What we want to know is, in terms of green social prescribing, what works for who, in what circumstances, and why? So there are some of the questions. It's been quite hard to unpick in the research what parts of green activities are working for people. Is it simply being in the fresh air? Is it the social interaction? Is it the kind of physical activity? What is working for who and why? How many people benefited from green social prescribing? So already across the region, there's lots and lots of people already engaging in activities. Who are they? What activities did they engage in? And then kind of really importantly, what do the outcomes indicate into how effective green social prescribing is? And does it lead to positive increases in mental health and well-being? And then kind of at an implementation level, what's the best way to deliver this? So speaking to healthcare professionals, I know as a psychologist, I would have been really interested in this in terms of CAMS. If I could have said to a young person, oh, there's this, you know, this group, do you think this would be helpful? But I suppose it's helping clinicians to understand this, and that it isn't just, oh, go for a walk, it'll make you feel better. There's actually a massive evidence base around this. Because I think that probably is the perception. I know I told my hairdresser what I did, and she just said, oh, so if I'm depressed, you're just going to tell me to go to the park. No, you know, there's a lot more going on than that. So at national and local level, there's a mixture of research and service evaluation activities to kind of achieve these aims. So locally across Humber, Coast and Vale, we're working with the University of York to evaluate a clinical cohort of individuals. So essentially, individuals with mild to moderate mental health difficulties coming into the social prescribing services across the 6 places, and then being allocated into a kind of green activity. So what we're going to do is take some outcome measures before, kind of some demographic information. They're going to go away, take part in an activity. It could be a range of different things. And then we're going to get some outcome measures at the end and kind of analyse that data. We're going to do that across the winter. Obviously, that might be a bit challenging in terms of what activities are being offered. And then we're going to do it again next summer to see kind of if there's any improvements. The national evaluation is being conducted by Sheffield, Hallam and University and Exeter. And they've got a researcher in Humber, Coast and Vale who's going to be doing some qualitative work, some case studies, some survey work, and then all this is going to be pulled together at a national level. So it's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the Green Social Prescribing Programme. So kind of from the very big to a very small piece of work, but nonetheless really important, I'm just going to talk you through a piece of patient and public involvement work that I did. So this is kind of in children and adolescents. So I got a small grant through the Research Design Service, and that just helps you to carry out these activities and make sure that you can pay the people that you're working with. So it was kind of based on my clinical experience. So last year I worked into a residential children's home, and it became quite apparent that a lot of the young people in there were stuck in a lot of the day. I know lockdown didn't help, but they weren't going out, and there was quite a wide range of reasons, some around risk, but also some just in terms of lack of availability of local activities. Maybe staff members didn't have that confidence to take the young people out, and it seemed to be really impacting on these young people. Also kind of wider reading, some of the studies here, we know that children in residential settings often miss out on many of the essential experiences required for healthy development. The evidence suggests that spending time outdoors is crucial to healthy development, but then the research also suggests that children in residential care are less likely than their peers to access these opportunities. So less likely to have those social opportunities, less likely to go and access different activities in the community. And then despite these complex difficulties, research directly involving young people, but particularly looked after young people, is quite limited. So my idea, I had some ideas about maybe increasing activity for these young people, or introducing some kind of intervention, but I wanted to know what the young people themselves thought about this. And it's a good job I did, because it actually turned out my idea wasn't very good. So I went into 4 children's homes in Hull. Hull County Council were absolutely brilliant, really interested in the research, really supportive. And actually young people signed up quite quickly, which I was quite surprised about, because actually the evidence suggests this is a hard to reach group of young people, which actually didn't seem to be the case. The £10 voucher and pizza that I offered for taking part in the PPI work might have helped, but nonetheless, the young people were really keen to talk about this area. So I asked them kind of their thoughts and feelings about the benefits of being outdoors and what kind of enables their access. Positive responses from most children. There was one child that said actually much prefers video games, would much prefer to be inside. But even then he said, actually I do play football twice a week and I find that's really helpful to burn off some energy. So all of the children reported access to a wide range of green activities and some really exciting things that they were doing as well, things that I never got to do when I was younger. And actually were quite insightful about the outdoors and how it makes them feel, so kind of calmer. Some children said that they'd learned new skills from being outside. So one boy was talking about, being on a horse and actually how he realises he has to stay calm and, kind of be kind to the horse. And then staff were highlighted as the biggest supportive factor in accessing that outdoor space. And then just a couple of nice quotes there. And a picture of a young girl's garden that she was really keen to show me. So actually it was really nice. It felt like a really nice positive conversation about green space. Some of the barriers, I guess, were some of the things that I had anticipated. So things around staffing levels. Obviously, if there's quite a few young people in a residential home, you can't necessarily take one child out if there's not enough staff members. Some activities are boring, which I guess is personal preference. Fears about safety, dirt, pollen, also kind of social anxiety. Quite a few of the young people talked about that. Behaviour, so one young man was really insightful about kind of, sometimes it's just not good for me to be outside. I might run away. Motivation was quite a big one, so requiring that staff encouragement. And also the staff members' interests and skills were really important. They kind of needed the staff to know what they were doing. So if you had a staff member perhaps that was kind of ex-army, had really good links with like local kind of scout groups or TA, that was really positive in kind of motivating them to get out and try those activities. Sorry, I'm having trouble with this. I asked them how they could be involved in research, and again, actually really positive. Quite a few of them have said, yeah, would love to be involved again, please come back. I know we had a picture that we were going to use in the presentation of a young boy who absolutely loved it, to be honest, was really positive. They gave me some really nice ideas about what they thought I could do. So I told them my idea, it wasn't necessarily the best. So use of diaries, cameras to measure outdoor activity, peer supports, that idea of kind of passing their knowledge on to their other young people, and measuring heart rate before and after an outdoor activity to see the effects. So kind of what next? Definitely want to take forward the PPI ideas that I've got after I've done that piece of work, and I think it just showed how powerful PPI is, and making sure you go and speak to the people you're going to research, because actually what we think is important might not be what's important to them. Thinking about kind of green social prescribing from the perspective of children and young people. So the national programme, we're more looking at 18 plus. So I think it'd be really nice to think about younger people and how they can benefit from this. Further research into understanding green space interventions, what works for who, why, that kind of idea. Got lots of collaborations developing with researchers at the University of York, University of Hull, kind of thinking about our shared areas of interest, so Department of Environment, for example. And I'm also working with the Child Orientated Mental Intervention Team, COMIC, and we have a stage 2 RFP bid, which I had hoped to discuss today, but we don't know yet. And that's looking at developing a nature-based intervention for children with ADHD, and that will be in collaboration with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. So fingers crossed for that one. So just quick summary, we know green and blue space has the potential to provide significant mental and physical health benefits. There's definitely increased research into this area. So if you look at some of the NIHR grants that have come out recently, they're around green social prescribing for children and adults. Strong network of locally interested clinicians. And yeah, I'm just keen to collaborate, speak to people. I've already had a really nice conversation with Bev this morning. Anybody who's interested in this area and thinking about taking some ideas forward. And I'll just put my email there if anyone wants to contact me afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mayet. That's really brilliant. And I think it really shows us not only in terms of mental health, but also our own health and well-being. You know, how amazing being out in nature can, and it can actually affect us and improve and enhance our lives. I mean, that picture that you had on, it just on there, just reminds me of something I've just done in lockdown during COVID and getting onto the paddleboard and going on the lakes and the rivers in Hull. So it's just amazing what we've got out here. So real diversity in terms of our own areas that we can, green spaces that we can get to, and blue spaces, beautiful. But thank you so much. In terms of questions, I've just got something here online, but if there's anything, I'll take a question in a moment. I've got Deborah Jackson. It's a nurse in the care home service in Humber. So it's really kind of thinking about your work that you're doing. People in care homes still continue to be very restricted, even before COVID, when money go into care homes and never can come out. And there is such a need for this type of group in our society. Are there any plans for extending the research to people in care homes and those with dementia?
Yeah, so the kind of green social prescribing program is quite broad. So we're definitely looking at kind of older adults, people with dementia, also focusing on kind of inpatient units. So yeah, I'd encourage anybody to contact me and we can have a discussion in terms of what is locally available. So my colleague has mapped all the groups across the region, and I think there's about 350 kind of organisations offering support, many that do have, you know, dementia specific qualifications. So we are trying to be quite broad with this. It is a 2-year programme, so there's only so much we can do. However, I think that there is so much interest. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, I've got from Peter Barron, love this topic and fully agree that green social prescribing is a useful tool in managing health. As you said, some people might be worried about their safety if they venture into more isolated areas. How do you handle this aspect to overcome any concerns when maintaining safety and benefits of green prescribing?
Yeah, I suppose it's whether it's kind of at an individual level and you're kind of venturing out and doing your own thing, or whether it's as part of a group. So I suppose if you were feeling quite anxious, it might be about joining a group and going out and doing some of those kind of activities as part of you know, a wider collective, and then you might have those kind of safeguards in place.
That's great, thank you. And I've got a final question. How can we translate this into our inpatient units? And I think you did mention a little bit about when we design services, but what do you think we need to do?
Yeah, so I've had a load of emails this morning actually from our Humber inpatient unit. So there's a programme called Green Walk-ins, that's from the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. And I just found out about that yesterday actually. So that's something that I've forwarded to the inpatient units. I'm going to be having a chat with them about that, and also about how we can broaden this. So our cohort's looking at mild to moderate mental health, but actually we want to think about the whole continuum, some from kind of prevention all the way up to crisis and inpatient specialist services. Again, 2 years, but if we can try and, you know, spread the word as wide as possible, then we will do.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Before I do though, do keep tweeting at hashtag Humber Research 2021. Please do keep going on with your live Q&As. Thank you so much for all the questions and the interaction. We really appreciate that. Now I'm going to be moving on to me actually presenting next. So I'm going to move on to the other part of the stage. So I'll see you in a second. All right, so hello everyone. So I'm Soraya Mayet. I've met you all already. I'm an addictions consultant psychiatrist, and I'm also the Director of Medical Education at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. an honorary senior lecturer at Hull and York Medical School. So I'm going to be talking about our telemedicine in addictions research trial that we did here at Humber, and I'm going to also at the end have one of our patients and our staff members letting you know what their experience of being in the trial was. So just a bit about what I do. I work at East Riding Partnership. It's an absolutely fantastic drug and alcohol service that covers all people and all ages. We have a young people service, and we also have a service that spans any age. We have no age that is not accepted to our service. Fully accessible. So if you have any patients or family members or yourself, you need any help in terms of addictions, please do self-refer. We are there for you to support you. So in terms of this research trial, this was telemedicine and addictions. It's a randomized controlled trial. I actually worked in collaboration with the University of Hull and the Hull and York Medical School, and of course our trust, Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust, was the sponsor. So I will let you know a bit about the trial, but I must thank all the people involved in the trial and also the sponsors of the trial, which is East Riding Council, East Riding CCG, and the Academic Health Science Network for Yorkshire and Humber. So next slide, please. So thinking about why we might be looking at research, it all goes back to what are the issues that are affecting people. So things in terms of addictions, opioid dependence is a really very difficult problem. It's a chronic relapsing condition, and it has high risks. And we know now, and I'm sure lots of you have heard about all the prescription medication dependence, the painkiller dependence. So we're actually getting about 5% of our population who've been started on prescription medication, opioids, codeine, for instance, coming through to us becoming dependent on those medications. And of course, there's heroin and other types of opioids that people might be using. And that very quickly leads on to dependence and addiction that takes over your life, and you really don't have the, it's so difficult to get out of that situation. So in terms of treatment, as I was saying, coming to the service, coming to addiction service is really the first point of contact. And what we can do is we will assess you and look at the options available. But the NICE guidelines looks at the opioid agonist treatment, such as methadone or buprenorphine, to actually support that person to help them come off the prescription opioids that they're on, potentially that we're dependent on, or heroin, for instance. And this is in combination with psychosocial interventions, because we absolutely know that you just give a medication, it doesn't work. We do need to ensure that all the other psychological therapies, all the other social interventions are there to help that person to come off those opioids, those medications, or whatever that they're addicted to. We know that when people do start treatment for our service, and this is internationally, the evidence shows that it reduces deaths and improves outcomes significantly. People get back their family, they get their jobs back, education, so many health benefits in terms of treatment. And we know in terms of what we do, when we are prescribing these medications, they are controlled drugs. We have to be very careful. So they are monitored by our addiction specialist prescribers. So that would be someone like myself, or indeed who's a doctor or a non-medical prescriber. So it's a very, very controlled system, supporting the patient with their own recovery goals, the patient guiding the treatment. Next slide, please. So what did we want to do in our fantastic, and I have to say brilliant service that we have in East Riding? We have a very big geographical area. So that really was our stumbling block. So what we have is, if you can see here, is we've got about 2,500 square kilometres to cover, and that's a community service. So how do you do that to enable everyone to access treatment easily and effectively? So we had a hub and spoke model. We had 3 big hubs across the whole county, plus we had lots of spoke sites in GP surgeries or community clinics, etc. You know, places where people be easily in cottage hospitals that people can easily access. However, what we didn't have was a lot of addiction prescribers who could oversee and monitor this medication. So we had a few of us available. And so ultimately, we all had to travel significant distances, or the patients had to travel to the bigger hubs. So what we wanted to do was really look at how can we support people accessing the service in a different way. So next slide, please. So this was before COVID that we started this whole journey, I have to say. So in 2018, I think we originally started and we thought about this area. We also did a lot of work speaking to patients and carers to actually say to them, what would work in a research trial for you to understand a bit more and get the benefits of looking at telemedicine. So we wanted to look at telemedicine before COVID. It'd never been done in addictions in a randomized control trial. So this is really the first randomized controlled trial that's out there in terms of looking at telemedicine addictions. So we wanted to know, could it help improve attendance? You know, did it help reduce travel? Was it satisfactory to patients when they were actually accessing it, and also to staff? And were the clinical outcomes affected? So we started this journey in 2018. We got ethics in 2009. We got the funding in end of 2018, I think, or 2019. We got the ethics in 2019, and we started in September 2019. Little did we know where we were going to be. Next slide, please. So what did we do? We did a feasibility randomized control trial. That's because it was there was no other randomized control trial of this internationally. So we looked at recruiting 60 people who had opioid dependence and they were prescribed methadone or buprenorphine, and they were actually attending these outreach clinics that I talked about. So they had to attend someone that was not near to the local hub, the large hub. They needed an addiction prescriber review. And what we did was we randomized them to either telemedicine or face-to-face consultations. So probably, you know, well, everyone knows what face-to-face was or did know a few years ago. And that was the regular consultation where we all met with the doctor or the non-medical prescriber. And one of our key workers would also be there supporting the patient and doing testing beforehand. So how did telemedicine work at that stage? This is before COVID. We actually had something a bit similar to what we're all used to now, this kind of Microsoft Teams type thing. The patient was with the actual key worker who would test them beforehand, and then they would see someone like myself on the other end of the camera, and I would conduct the actual consultation with the patient, for instance. And then, so that's how it worked, and I think it's a lot of people might be a bit more used to that idea now than it was when we started. So it was all completely novel almost in that stage that when we started. And then the follow-up we had with patients and staff, and that was because of COVID actually ended up being telephone reviews. So that was the plan, to have 2 consultations in each group and randomized telemedicine versus face-to-face. Next slide, please. So what were the results? We had really fantastic uptake. We actually recruited 60 people, but one person had to be excluded from the study because of their age. Unfortunately, about over 65, but our ethics did not agree to that. So we had 59 people randomized, and there were 29 in the telemedicine group and 30 people in the face-to-face group. The mean age was 44, mainly single, all white British, and they were mainly male, so 83%. I mean, that really reflected, in terms of the white British, our population, but in terms of the actual diversity, that was something to be thinking about. Was this a diverse enough? Did we include enough people? Was it inclusive enough? So that's something to think about, and it may have been because these people were actually living in the outreach areas rather than near the hubs. The medications that people were prescribed were mainly methadone, that's 71%, and the other patients had buprenorphine. It was daily supervised. That meant actually, for most people, they were going to the chemist every single day of the week, or 6 days a week, actually, not Sundays. So that's 71%. So you can see that in terms of our treatment, it was quite it involved a lot of effort on the patient's part to collect the medication every day. Many people were tobacco smokers, important in terms of thinking about health outcomes, and particularly in psychiatry and addictions, it's a real big area to look at, to smoking cessation. And many people were drinking, about 40% drinking 3 days a week of alcohol. And in terms of the actual patients, we found that urine testing, they were about a third of people were using opiates on top of their prescribed medication, 24% cocaine, 22% benzodiazepines, and 34% cannabis. So you can see this is quite a complicated group of people who are prescribed opioid for opioid dependence, also a number of people using other substances at the same time. Next slide, please. So what were our results? Well, absolutely, interestingly, I suppose, the urine test results stayed the same between the two groups. So the people that were randomized to telemedicine versus the people that are coming to face-to-face, they basically, their use of substances didn't change. So what that would tell us is that at least it wasn't any negative effect, at least from telemedicine. So that was a good thing. The self-reported, so we also use self-reported data from patients, because they'll tell us what's happening, because tests only show maybe the last week's worth, but they don't show us what's kind of been happening in over a kind of a different period. So we asked patients as well, about their substance use, and they reportedly, they said it was the same, really, it came out about the same as before and after for both telemedicine and the face-to-face group. So that was good to see that telemedicine wasn't worsening any outcomes. In terms of the prescribed medication doses, they were stable, and we didn't have any adverse outcomes specifically related to the telemedicine or the whole trial, actually. We did have, which I think a lot of you will probably understand, a bit of connectivity issues, a bit of free screen, and a bit of that sort of thing happening, which of course, we didn't know this is going to be like that now, but that's something I think we've got used to a bit more. What was interesting, though, was that a lot of our area didn't have the Wi-Fi connectivity before we started this trial. So as part of the trial, we had to get all of that infrastructure set up, which actually took quite a bit of time to get the telemedicine up and running, actually. Maybe it helped then with the pandemic. So now everyone was like kind of ready to go by the time that we did go into pandemic mode. Next slide, please. So in terms of the results, we found that, of course, the travel did reduce. You might not be able to see that exactly, but what that was in kilometres. So before, people were travelling face-to-face, 25 kilometres round trip or more to get to their appointments, that's patients. And afterwards, it really almost about halved the travel. You see, people were still travelling, but not really significant reductions in terms of the travel. So that's travel. Next slide, please. In terms of the attendance rates, now I thought when we put the hypothesis in that more people would attend for the telemedicine because it might be a bit easier, it's close to home. So what we found was actually, it was really quite similar. The attendance rates were brilliant, actually, in our addiction service, above 70%, absolutely fantastic, for a really hard to treat population quite often, with very complex needs. So really, that was maybe showing the service that people did like coming to the service, and that was telemedicine or face-to-face. What you can see in the second consultation, unfortunately, that really hit with COVID. It was like March 2020 by that time. We found that quite a significant number of our telemedicine consultations couldn't be booked, unfortunately, due to all the restrictions that had been taking place. We weren't allowed to use our outreach clinics, hospitals closed to our external workers, which we were effectively. We weren't allowed into GP surgery. So a lot of the outreach that we had previously been doing, we couldn't do. And those telemedicine consultations couldn't go ahead, unfortunately. that was, I think, what I related to at the start, that to get telemedicine set up at the start took longer than, of course, the face-to-face, which was the regular type of consultation. But you can see really very similar attendance rates despite that. In fact, the DNA rates were slightly higher in the face-to-face, so people not attending. Next slide, please. In terms of satisfaction, we really wanted to know, did people find this satisfactory? Did they actually like that experience? So we looked at the patient satisfaction after each consultation, and we found that really overall the satisfaction was high throughout the groups, whether it was telemedicine or if it was face-to-face. So that was good to see as well. Next slide, please. And then that was the patients that I described. When we looked at the staff satisfaction, they also felt it was good or very good. So they had very good, it was good satisfaction rates for staff. But as you can see in face-to-face, the staff actually found a bit more satisfaction with the face-to-face. And I think we all understand that, because we were all, when we've now been through this telemedicine versus face-to-face, I think, well, a lot of us prefer the face-to-face overall. So I can see where staff are coming from too. Next slide, please. So overall, what did everyone say? Well, patients, we did the qualitative results. We asked them, you know, what did they think about it? And just looking at the telemedicine part of it, they really were saying, when we analysed this, that it was easier and it saved time. It saved a lot of travel time. It was better than travelling, saving bus fare, saving travel time. It's a good thing, good idea, and it will save time for patients and the clinician. It was just easy. It was good for people who are not physically able to attend, accessibility, and felt the same as being in person. So that's really good feedback that patients were telling us. And it was easy without the travel. I felt comfortable. So remember, this is before COVID that we started this, and people weren't used to this, but they were really embracing it and liking not having to have the travel. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, what we found when we looked at telemedicine versus face-to-face for our feasibility trial, attendance, clinical outcomes and satisfaction for patient and staff was similar. The travel distances were reduced, so that's a real benefit. And there were no adverse events, but the limitations include that Wi-Fi connectivity issue and, of course, diversity. And so really what we need to do is, when we're thinking the larger trial, we need to make it a more diverse and inclusive trial that ensures that we have all representation. And, of course, that then we'd be looking at kind of a bit more national perspective. Next slide, please. So I'd really like to thank all the team, absolutely brilliant team. The patients were amazing. Just, you know, in terms of recruitment, we fully recruited. More people wanted to be in the trial. The staff were absolutely brilliant. And the team that I worked with, and of course our fabulous research team, were so fantastic to help support and ensure this trial could go ahead. I've got now my the patient and one of my staff members who are in a video next. So if I can then put the next slide, please. And if I can thank Sarah for being absolutely wonderful and coming on the video, and thank Sian as well. I know they're not here. It would have been brilliant if they could have been here, but they're on the video. So hopefully the video is going to work next. So thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Hello. So we're going to just have a quick chat with Sarah, and Sarah's going to tell us about her experience of being in the telemedicine trial. And I'll introduce you to Sarah. Thank you very much, Sarah, for coming on here to tell us about your experience as being a patient in the telemedicine trial.
You're welcome. Yeah, I was more than happy to be offered the opportunity to be part of the trial, contributing to the research. Personally, I participated with the hope of improving the accessibility for fellow service users, alongside moving the treatment, forward. I felt extremely comfortable, relaxed during the consultation. Very often having an appointment with several clinicians present in the room can feel a little overwhelming. However, using this approach, that took that away somehow. As for any negatives, none for me personally. However, I suppose those who have poor mastery of technology may prove to be an issue, or for users in very rural locations with poor internet or lack of devices, that could be an issue. It could be a little concerning for those who are not accustomed to seeing themselves on screen. Perhaps this could, be an option for the patient, whether to, just have the audio on. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I found it extremely convenient. Having access to more than one practitioner at the same time meant, travelling to fewer appointments. That reduced in travel time, travel costs. Anxiety levels were decreased, associated with physically having to go to unfamiliar environments. The anxiety I normally get when I'm waiting in clinicians' waiting rooms, that was also gone as well, as were fears of spreading, catching the virus, during in-person medical visits. Obviously, those with increased concerns that infection, the spreading of the infection is decreased. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, that's it really. I felt, very comfortable and no problems at all. And I think the advantages in cost regarding the NHS and patients, and the ability to provide care to people with mobility limitations, or those in rural areas if they've got internet. I think it's a great service. Thank you. And I'll hand you over to Sian, one of the clinicians.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much for all your feedback. Really appreciate that. And thank you. And I'm going to hand you over to put Sian on the screen. So thank you, Sarah. That was brilliant.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm Sian. I'm one of the nurses who works in the addiction service. I too found the experience of telemedicine really positive for all the reasons Sarah has highlighted already. From a key worker point of view, it's a really useful tool to have because, as Sarah said, you can quickly access the doctor to do prescriber reviews as a standard thing. But also, if there was ever any need for a patient to be reviewed for any reason outside of the regular review slots, it gives that opportunity for it to happen without it causing too much, in terms of travel and booking an appointment with the doctor when they're obviously busy running the clinics. It gives that opportunity for a quick review to happen with minimal to the patient. There can no travel necessary. The appointment can happen quite fluidly, and issues can be resolved really quickly. I guess a little downside would be the technology. That's all. A couple of times when we did it with a couple of the patients, there was times when it wasn't great, so there was a bit of freezing on the screen, but that was minimal, to be fair. If you've got good reception, then I don't see that as being an issue at all. It's a lot of the benefits for the patient, as Sarah highlighted, are really good. There's less travel. There's less in the current climate of virus awareness and stuff. There's less actual contact going on. The patient can be with a key worker, so they work on that together to talk to the doctor. I don't personally feel that there are any negatives with the telemedicine versus face-to-face. I don't think there's any difference between a face-to-face appointment and doing it by telemedicine or via the internet. You still get that contact, you're still able to see each other's body language and interact with one another as you would in a face-to-face consultation. and any changes to medication regimes or whatever the care plan reviews, they can all happen quite seamlessly, quite fluidly, with minimal disruption to anybody. So I think it's a really positive strategy, and I'd welcome using it in the future. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sean. I really appreciate your feedback, and thank you again to Sarah. Really appreciate you coming forward and letting us know how you found the actual telemedicine from your side too. So thank you both of you. I'm now going to finish off. Thank you to everyone for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought I'd just step in so that Soraya didn't have to chair her own questions. So can we just have a round of applause for Soraya for that fantastic presentation, please? And unless there's any absolutely burning questions, I think we might have to go to the break. We're 10 minutes overrunning at the moment, so can we just take 5 minutes to grab a coffee, and then we'll come back at 11:45, if that's okay. Thank you. Hello, welcome back everyone. It's great to be back again at the 5th Annual Research Conference, Developing a City of Research at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. So thank you everyone for coming through our research journey here at Humber. We have now got our fantastic Catherine Hart, who's our Assistant Director of Research and Development at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. And Catherine's going to be talking about celebrating the research and changing lives that's being done here. And I'm also going to introduce you to Emma Anderson, who is our Senior Research Assistant at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust, and she's going to tell us about her research journey, co-produced video. So please, can you give a warm welcome to Catherine and Emma? Thank you. Hi there. So in the interest of speed, because we're running over because we've tried to pack so much in, and that's my fault because there's so much good stuff going on at Humber. I just didn't want to leave anything out, but we've crammed so much in, we're now overrunning. So we won't take questions for the 2 sections that myself and Emma are doing. There's some videos and some really good stuff, but if you've got questions, we'll be around afterwards, or you can email us, but we're just going to try and cut down a bit of time. Now, I've got the really easy bit of the conference. As has become tradition, we've started producing an annual video. So I get the pleasure of just sitting back and watching it along with you folks here. And this is a celebration of research over the past year. It's been a very different year for all of us. We've had to adapt the way that we've done things to make sure we can still offer the benefits of research to people. So it really is, it does what it says on the tin. We're celebrating research and how we change lives. So sit back and watch the video. Thank you.
We were really grateful to have the opportunity to take part in the aspect phobia study. It got my son some help with his phobia, and also we felt that it was really important to contribute to research and with the ultimate aim of helping lots of other people too.
Andrew, when did you first get involved in research and why?
I would say about 5-6 years ago. Just thought, well, if you give any help to anybody and bit of support and that, and really just to give some information about your past experience, just correlate that for other people to understand that you might suffer a mental illness, but you're never isolated really.
And what do you get from taking part in research? Why do you do it?
Just positive feedback and want to give something back to society, really.
What would you say if someone else was thinking about taking part in research?
Go for it. It is important to understand what mental illness is and how mentally people like yourself suffer and how we can improve our lot, really.
I was asked initially, I think it came from my social worker at the time, and I was really up for it because it gives me an opportunity to talk about psychosis and about what that means to me as an individual and how it comes about, and looking at finding ways to keep busy and keep doing things to alleviate that. And that's what I've been doing every few weeks. My work through the SEAM project. Research for me is something that is very important, and it needs to be done so that it can be carried forward for other people to watch and to see and to know that it's just an opportunity to understand a little bit more about people who suffer with certain conditions and how it affects them and so on and so forth.
And if someone was thinking about taking part in research, what would you say to them?
I would say definitely do it, because again, the generations and generations that are to come, research, however it's done in the field and however high tech it may become, the face-to-face interview or talk about how it affects you and about how great it is as a tool in terms of not just for myself as an individual, but for other people, including people who do lectures and stuff like that about it. It gives everyone an opportunity to know that there was a human behind the mental health side of things. I found it incredibly good and empowering, to be fair.
Research, and I've had a great experience of it so far. It's given me some amazing opportunities and the chance to develop some new skills. It's also really exciting to be a part of service development and seeing what the future of mental health services might look like. It's also been a really rewarding experience. It's amazing to build some really meaningful relationships with people that we work with and make a genuine difference in their lives. And on top of that, give them the opportunity to have a voice and a say in what the future of the NHS looks like, especially since the research team make it so easy as well. You know, they're so enthusiastic, you can't help but feel the same. I think as a patient, there's lots of benefits to becoming involved with the research team. Often it involves being part of a new assessment or a new treatment or even a new type of therapy, which is all quite exciting, and it's something that maybe you wouldn't have received otherwise. But on top of that, research-informed service, mental health services are changing and developing all the time, and actually patients are the people that should tell us how to do that best. We need to empower you, we need to hear your voices. We need these services to work for you and to be the best they can possibly be. We need to do that together, and it needs to be collaborative. And on top of that, hopefully it's an enjoyable experience. I'd like to hope so. I've always enjoyed being a part of research as a clinician, and I've loved being able to form relationships and work really closely with people. You know, it's been amazing.
I've always been interested in research, especially research that could improve my quality of life and well-being. So when I started working as a peer support worker and I saw the opportunity to become a research champion, I got in touch right away. And I find the research team very resourceful and effective. They are always there to answer my questions and support me in my role as a research champion. So I get the chance to signpost patients to new studies, as well as get involved in some of the studies as well, which I find exciting and interesting. I find it heartening to see how research can change people's lives and offer them some purpose and meaning. Being a research champion also gives me a sense of belonging and a way of giving back to the community, to our communities.
We'd like to speak to you today about shaping the future and how you can play a part in making research more diverse and inclusive.
Help us to understand any potential barriers to taking part in health research so that we can work with people to overcome them.
Take part in research and help give hope for the future.
Thank you. As I said, I won't take questions, but hopefully you enjoyed that little snippet of some of the things we've been up to over the past year. I'm going to introduce you to Emma now.
Thank you. Hi everyone. So my name's Emma. I've worked in the research team for sort of just over 4 years, and this year I was involved in a project looking to develop an animation video to describe what research involves and some of the benefits. I'd like to talk to you about that today. So I have been a bit ambitious with my slides, so I will try to stick to my 10 minutes. We do have a couple of people in the audience today that have actually contributed to parts of this video as well. And so this came off the back of some funding that we received from the NIHR Clinical Research Network from Yorkshire and Humber. And just a bit of a roadmap, I'm going to talk you through what the project brief was, the journey of sort of creating the video, the power of co-production, what's coming next in terms of the project, and then a bit of an evaluation. So we'd noticed that a lot of existing animation videos on the internet tended to focus a lot on research into clinical drug trials and in hospital settings. And we felt this didn't really show the variety of research that we have on offer in Humber. And so really the project wanted to show that research is something that's for everybody. It can be fun and rewarding, and it's definitely not something to fear. And we also wanted to be able to engage our trust service users, but also to empower clinicians who maybe didn't feel very confident about starting a conversation about research. So in that way, the video could become a tool for them and was hopefully something that we'll be able to show across sort of GP practices and used by anyone really. So yeah, my journey started, I got involved in the project as our manager Catherine sent out an email asking would anybody like to research some local marketing companies. So I jumped forward. I quite enjoy creative things. As a team, we've never done anything like this before, so it was all quite new. So we appointed a marketing firm, and then we had an initial meeting with them to have a look at what designing a video involves. So we can see some of the steps there. So what I'll do, I'd like to show you the video, the final result, and then I'll deconstruct the video a little bit to show you how the ideas came together to create the final product. So I'm hoping this is going to play.
My research journey. Reassuring. When I received my diagnosis, I felt alone and afraid. I didn't know what would happen to me. I felt as though there was no hope. One day, my clinician asked me if I would be interested in hearing more about research. At first, I was unsure. I pictured people in white lab coats. I worried about what it might involve. But I thought, nothing to lose by finding out more. My clinician reassured me all research is voluntary and I can change my mind at any time. They asked if I'd like to chat to a researcher. I thought it sounded new and different. Everyone. The next day, I got a call from a researcher. They told me research is for everyone. It turns out there are lots of different types of research studies to take part in. The researchers support you all the way through. S. Shaping your NHS. I thought, what's in it for me? They explained, without research, there is no change. Research helps us develop new and better ways to support people like me. It feels good to know you are part of future change. It may also be a way to access further support, not available in the NHS yet. E. Engaging. There are many different ways you can take part in research, and you'll always be given time to think and talk about it with family and friends. A. Action. I decided to take action. Before my first appointment, I felt excited and nervous. The researcher let me know what to expect, which put me at ease, and I had the opportunity to ask any questions. R. Rewarding. Research is interesting. You're part of a process. It can be a chance to learn new skills, gain information, and talk about important issues. It can be reassuring to know others had similar experiences. Research can open doors to new friendships and opportunities. With research, it's not just about my condition. The focus is on living, how best to live. C. Contributing. I felt I was making a difference. I soon realised my unique experience was what they were interested in, and I was the expert on this. I enjoyed the chance to chat and always looked forward to my follow-up visits. H. Hope now and for the future. Research gives us hope now and for the future. Every person taking part in research counts, and your views really do matter. Would you like to change the way the future looks for you and others? Speak to our friendly research team.
My slide's not on the screen, but yeah, I'd like to spend a few minutes just to sort of have a look at how we developed those ideas and came together as a group. So the video was co-produced. So as a bit of a starting point, we got together as a core team just to have a think about what we might be looking for from the video. So we gathered together some existing videos of different designs that we'd found via YouTube. We also already had a couple of things that had come from research champions that we really liked, and we wanted to make sure we got those in the video. So one of those was the research anagram that we see as a central theme in the video, and also using the term, would you like to change how the future looks, rather than inviting people to take part in research. Somebody had suggested that the term research often can be quite a value-laden word, and actually if we connect with people in a way that's would you like to change the future, most people will say yes, and that's actually a lot of the reason that people would give for taking part in research. And we also wanted to have a participant's journey into research, so that it told a bit of a story and a narrative and invited people to kind of find out a bit more. So at the same time, I contacted our Patient and Carer Experience Forum and organised a workshop. So I invited members to come and join. And as you can see, we had a range of different people that were involved in the design process from start to finish. And during the workshop, which took place over MS Teams, I asked people, what would you like to know about research? We had a mixture of people that had either been involved in research or had never been involved in research before, which was really great. We also wanted to know things like colours and styles, how can we make it more inclusive? And we showed people some existing videos and asked, what did you think of, again, sort of colours, styles? And I suppose in developing the ideas, it was really interesting to see things shape and evolve from people's different perspectives. So as researchers, we initially spoke a lot about the fact that research is confidential, you have the right to withdraw, safety and ethics, all of those sorts of things that you learn about in GCP training. But actually people fed back, this isn't so important. What I want to know is why do research and what's in it for me? And there were also a lot of concerns around feeling that their contribution mattered. So people wanted to know that they felt valued and that they were kind of contributing to something meaningful. There was also some fears around people worried would they be capable to take part in research, worrying about things like what would they be asked, and again sort of whether their contribution would be of value. So it was about reassuring people that it was absolutely fine to ask questions, you know, that we were interested in unique experiences and you in no way had to be an expert. So given that reassurance became quite a central theme in the video. Again, things around colours, graphics, and we had the theme of hope running through that came from one of our co-production team. So we kept in touch, as I said, throughout the process and sent out a thank you at the end, which had a message with all of those lovely things that people had contributed to. In terms of what next, we released the video on Clinical Trials Day, and we did have some feedback regarding inclusivity, that the character we'd chosen is probably the type of person that's most likely to take part in research, so working age, white female. So moving forward, we've been having a look at developing some new characters from different ethnicities and also age groups, you know, so that we're making sure that we're representing people in the video. I think we focus quite a lot in our discussions around including people with different mental health difficulties and cognitive difficulties, but that maybe wasn't so central in the video. And we've also translated the video into different languages, which people have fed back is actually much more meaningful. To have a language translation that is done well is something that's really important. So just to sum up and give an evaluation, obviously we had lots of different experiences and skills, which gave some invaluable insights. I reflected doing co-production where it requires a lot of planning to make sure that that's meaningful. It was quite challenging doing this during the pandemic, so obviously all the feedback and things was collected remotely. The length of the video was perhaps a bit longer than we'd initially hoped, but overall it's definitely highlighted some important insights into barriers to taking part in research. So we've made more connections with kind of local community groups and had some really great conversations with people about what they fear around research and what maybe stops them approaching and taking part, which is really invaluable. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. And I'd just like to give a quick shout out to Jean, who's in the audience, and Saida, both of whom were involved in the co-production and gave some really valuable insights. So thank you very much. Lovely, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming today, and thank you very much for Catherine and Emma's presentations. I won't be able to take any questions. I'm sorry about that. We're going to have to move on. But thank you for coming with us on this journey. So the next person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Jane Ray. Dr. Jane Ray is a senior lecturer in nursing and a director of research Faculty of Health Sciences. And I'd also like to introduce Kirsty Fishburn, who's a lecturer and programme director and nurse at Nursing Mental Health at the University of Hull. And they're going to be talking about the Stepping Down project, experiences of moving from secure care and into the community. And it's a video that's coming on next. Secure care and into the community.
Welcome to our presentation, the experiences of moving from secure care into the community, the Stepping Down project. I'm Jane Ray, I'm a senior lecturer in nursing and director of research in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Hull. Presenting with my colleague Kirsty Fishburn, who's a lecturer in mental health nursing and prescribing in the Faculty of Health Sciences. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the team. In addition to myself and Kirsty, there's Professor Mark Hayter, who was recently at the University of Hull and is now at Manchester Metropolitan University. Also Suki, who was our postdoc research assistant, who worked with us throughout on the project, and Carlin Scott, who manages the specialist forensic community team. In addition to the team presented on the image, we also had support from Steve Shaw, who's the programme lead for commissioning in adult social care, and the wider team who helped us in both shaping and developing the project. This project was made possible by funding from the National Health Service Executive. The funding was actually focused on issues to do with equalities or inequalities. And there was a key driver around the equalities agenda in mental health services. So the importance of ensuring that services are accessible, regardless of any structural, societal or cultural barriers. And that included protected characteristics, as outlined in the Equalities Act. When we looked more closely at NHS benchmarking data around people who were in low and medium secure services, what we saw was there's some particular issues when you look at this from an equalities perspective. We know that black men and black British men in particular are overrepresented in the service. We also know that women are overrepresented in relation to the criminal justice pathway. However, when we were setting this project up, we had further discussions around the equalities issues, because what we know is that Hull has a very distinctive equalities profile. So while the national picture is quite rightly focused on issues to do with race, ethnicity and gender, we felt that it was really important to broaden that equalities focus and look at through a slightly different lens. So look at it in terms of particularly health inequalities, experiences of multiple discrimination and disadvantage, and intersectionality of these different elements. Because what we know is that issues such as homelessness, unemployment, substance misuse, crime and poverty exacerbate around mental health conditions and how people are supported within the community. We also know that the point where people step down from secure services into the community is a high-risk transition point. Previous research has shown that there are a number of different challenges in relation to this. First, this relates to lengthy periods of time living inside secure environments and that reintegration into the community. There's often disconnect from social and our community networks, which need to be re-established. For individuals, often anxiety about that reconnection with family and friends, and concerns about being rejected perhaps by the communities that they've moved into. For some, there are restrictions on travel, contact with others, monitoring, risk of call and potential readmission. This 9-month qualitative study had two primary aims. This was about exploring inequalities experienced by those that were currently living in the community and had stepped down, and also those about to undertake the transition. What we also wanted to do is to explore with people who use services, as well as staff who support them, what support was currently available, what was meeting those needs, and perhaps identify any gaps in current provision to inform future planning. As with many studies in the last 18 months, although we set this up as a 9-month study, there's been a bit of stopping and starting throughout that 9 months. So what started as a 9-month study is still ongoing after a significant length of time. Essentially, the study approach had a number of key elements. So first, in pre-data collection, we actually looked at the literature that was available, and we also had ongoing discussions with our colleagues in services and people who use services in the design and development of that to understand how best to capture that data. We also went through ethical approvals, so that was both from the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Hull, as well as the health research approvals, in order to get those approvals in place prior to data collection. Two key arms for the study. One was data collection with staff, which was undertaken via focus groups and conducted online. And the other element was data collection with service users in the form of interviews. So that's people who have already stepped down from services. Interviews with people who are still inpatients in secure settings. Those interviews are ongoing and we expect to conduct them soon. I'm going to hand over next to Kirsty, who actually was involved in a lot of the interviews, and she's going to share some of our findings. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you, Jane. So as Jane said, I got to do a little bit of the fun part. I got to go and meet the staff and meet the service users who are working within the service. So the next few slides are just looking at some of the themes that we found from meeting lots of people, which was really good. So if you have a look at the slides, in the bubbles we've put some direct quotes that actually came from the focus groups and some of the interviews. So to first focus on the kind of staff groups that we talked to. We met with lots of people from the MDT within the forensic services, so we had lots of different opinions represented, which was really good. And one of the key things was the positive relationships that form within the staff MDT, but also within the staff and the service user groups who access the service. And it was really good to see the positivity there in relation to how staff are heavily involved in their patient caseload with their service users and how they support in an inpatient service, but obviously with that stepping down into the community. And there was lots of sharing stories of how it had gone really well and how we'd seen teams pull together and support service users in this quite a tricky transition, isn't it, as we know, from a secure service into a community living environment. Some of the barriers I think that we came across from the staff, which I'm sure you will appreciate, obviously when stepping down from a forensic service into the community, it's looking for that right housing in the right area with the right support. How do we find that? How do you make sure that's appropriate? Perhaps close enough to family, perhaps further away from family if that's what's required for the community package to work. There were some issues in relation to accessing monies and fundings for benefits, and the staff felt, I think, frustrated at having to sort of be the driving force behind that, because I think it felt like patients wanted things to happen much quicker than I think it did, which is understandable. But that communication from the staff and from the MDT to the service users was really good, and it was good to see the staff that explored that and explained that with positivity, which was really good. Jane, if you could have the next slide, please. And I think, like, we've picked up on some of the ethnic diverse groups that we have within forensic services, and I think the staff highlighted this, that we'd all love a fabulous service that greeted every form of diversity of human being. As we know, mental health patients don't fit a box, nor should they fit a box, but these specialist provisions and specialist services aren't always available within our local area, and people can step down from forensic services, all age range, all ethnicities, you know, well, it's a range of humanity, isn't it? Which is wonderful, really. But obviously, sometimes I think we feel like we might lack being able to provide that specialist service, and I think that was quite a frustrating thing. But one thing that came from the focus groups was that the staff really did try their best to access wider ranging services, from charities to church groups to, even if it was outside of the area, perhaps what we could offer and travel into Hull, which was lovely to see. Sort of acknowledging that vulnerability from moving from a secure environment where we've got lots of staff around us 24 hours a day to having your own front door, and how the staff prepared the service users for stepping down into the community, and trying to help them integrate them into the local community with shops, with the local takeout, some of the conversations that we had and that sort of thing, and acknowledging the complexity of the service user that we have in forensic services. We know that some service users have to come back into services for, say, psychological support, occupational therapy support. So again, it's kind of that, you're in your own community, you're in your own flat, but then you come back into secure services, and how staff was supporting the service users with that as well. So it was really positive. Thank you, Jane. I got to move on and talk to the service users that we have in the forensic services, which was lovely, actually. It was really nice listening to them talk about them either getting ready to step down or stepping down. An overwhelming word was freedom, as we can see, we sort of highlighted on the slides, about they're out of the service, and excited to be out of the service, excited to live independently on their own. And it was lovely to watch that. It absolutely was, and listen to them talk about, with support from the forensic services, how they'd been able to get ready to step down, because that's a big thing, isn't it, in forensic services, actually thinking there was a world outside of the secure door, and having your own tenancy, your own property. But most of the service users we spoke to also talked about the anxiety about that, about, well, I've always had staff, I've always had, you know, someone next door in the next room, and all of a sudden I won't have that. And what's that for me? How does that, who am I outside of this service, outside of being a forensic patient service user? And I think that's quite an important thing to acknowledge. And it was really interesting to see that came overwhelmingly from the service users that we spoke to about my new role, who am I in this new world, which is really interesting to see. But again, it also came from the service users, as it did from the staff, the strength of the communication and relationship between the service user and the community and the forensic services that's provided. And that was really good to see that come from both sides, which was really good. I think one of the things as well, in relation to our service users when they stepped down, was that sort of, what support do they have? Because it's not just about emotional and psychological support. We have to think about financial support. One service user I met, who was wonderful to speak to, had never heard of an Alexa. Obviously other ones are available, to be careful, but absolutely overwhelmingly in relation to mobile phones and AIs, I think we call them, and that whole new world that opened up to them, that's quite scary. And I think that acknowledgement of being quite scary. All of a sudden your money's all yours, all of a sudden you can go buy what you want to buy at the shop. And service users said that they felt quite prepared. They'd had lots of support from staff, knowing they were stepping down in relation to cooking and budgeting and finding hobbies. But still, it's that support when at the end of the day they went back onto the ward. Obviously the service users in the community stayed in their own property, but knew that they had that support, which was wonderful to see. But whilst acknowledging their own fears about what happens if it goes wrong, what happens if I get pulled back into hospital, and how would that work? What do I do now? Do I get a job? Do I go to college? What happens if people don't like me? What happens if I've got a big sign above my head that says I've been in a forensic service? And that was a genuine fear for quite a few of them. But again, seeing that relationship with the staff and with the service user was very reassuring, and very genuine is definitely what we picked up in the interviews that we had. And a lot of that support in relation to connecting back to the community, connecting back to their families. As we know, people in forensic services, sadly, the family connection often breaks or becomes a very unsupportive relationship. So a lot of the service users wanted to reconnect with family, and you could see the support that was being done to help them reconnect, living closer to a family member, you know, being able to go out and visit, have tea with their family and then come back home. There was, Jane touched on earlier, a genuine fear of being readmitted and what could that mean, but it never came across like a threat in the interviews that we had. It came across like, if I did something wrong or I did something that was unsafe, then I'd go back to hospital, and it seemed more a safety netting than a threat. So that's certainly what we got from the interviews. So the interviews were overwhelmingly positive, with some real kind of acknowledgement of how scary it is, and I really do need some help and from service users and the staff alike, that help was very much there. So thank you, I really enjoyed them. So thank you, Jane.
So I'd just like to pull together some key themes and highlight some of the things that we're pulling out of the study to date. First of all, the importance of that early planning for transition really is about the right support at the right time that meets the individual's needs. I think secondly is that value of stepping stone provision. You don't go from one identity and life to another without kind of some steps in that transition, and intermediate services where people can practice those skills for independence and adjust to that new life are really important. We know there's issues around diversity in provision in order to meet everybody's needs. Service user involvement was a really important thread from both staff and service users. So that's about involvement at individual level, getting that support right for that person and individualised and bespoke, but actually broader service user involvement in what a service looks like, what it provides, what it delivers, to actually shape that agenda. I think finally there was a theme around safeguarding and client vulnerability. From a service point of view, it's about them being confident that service users are safe when they're in the communities, and for service users it was almost about feeling safe and how important that was to them. And we know it's difficult. It's about getting that balance right between that independence and risk. We're currently finalising data collection in the next month, and then moving on to final analysis towards the end of the year, and we will start further reporting and dissemination early next year. I'd like to thank you for listening to our presentation and express our thanks again to our colleagues in Humber Trust for working with us on this project, and particularly to the service users who gave up their time and told us their stories. Thank you to them for taking part. We're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much to Dr. Jane Ray and Kirsty Fishburn. So I just wanted to finalise, before we finish with Caroline Flint, it's going to be just a couple of questions that had been missed from before. Oh, sorry. Was there any questions? Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. So was there any questions from the audience at all? No. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on. Thank you very much, both of you. Really appreciate hearing about the that transition. I think that what you've raised in terms of inclusivity, diversity, and how we actually look at all of those issues, and then that transition into the community is so important. But thank you very much, both of you. All right, thank you. So before we finish, we just have two questions that we had for Professor Calum Semple. So the first one, it's maybe a bit of an easier one. Will 16-year-olds get double jabbed?
Hesitant on this and not actually answer this at all, because the government takes advice from JCVI, and they're privileged to see early data under conditions of confidentiality and make decisions and recommendations based on that. So I'm absolutely not in a position to comment on that. I'm going to duck that.
Oh, well, maybe we'll hear,
sorry.
Hopefully here in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is, have you considered any, thinking about the COVID impact on social inequalities, have you considered any strategies to address these inequalities as part of your work in order to improve outcomes in the future pandemics?
Yes, so this is a very important question. So the ISARIC was set up to deal with nasty outbreaks, and we rapidly found ourselves in the maelstrom of COVID. One of the things we found out very early on in the outbreak was that the effect on various ethnic groups was severe, We've highlighted that. And we became wrapped up in what essentially became a woke debate. We were infectious disease and intensivists and epidemiologists, and to the best of our abilities, we adjusted all the analysis to account for deprivation. But that in itself could not account for the excess admissions and excess mortality and morbidity that we observed. We suggested that there could be other factors, be they genetic or other, and got very severely criticised for making an argument for biological determinism, which is to suggest that that a disease affects a population due to that population's biological features as opposed to the societal circumstances in which that population finds itself. And again, this became essentially a political debate rather than a scientific debate. Subsequent to that, two pieces of science have come out. One is to show that there are genetic polymorphisms, but in fact they attribute a tiny increase in risk. But there is better data supporting the role for vitamin D and vitamin D deficiency, which may have a much greater role than was ever appreciated before. So to answer the question, what have we done about it? First of all, we've treated the data with as great care as we could. We brought topic experts in, a group led by Professor Calum Semple from Leicester, who leads research groups looking at multimorbidity, particularly in Asian communities. And he has been looking very hard to try and identify why is it that these ethnic groups, people often use the word ethnic minorities. You have to remember in society, these ethnic groups are often the majority, and to simply say that it's because they live in poor circumstances does not actually properly account for the increased risk. And so it does seem that there is a mixture of societal and biological issues at here. So what have we done? We've recognized the limitations of our sphere of expertise, and we brought in topic experts to deal with it. But we were essentially defeated in the early days, and we never managed to get that research published because it was considered politically incorrect to suggest that there could be some biological determinism behind what was happening to these groups. And I think that's a tragedy, because actually if we'd got better resources put in place, we might have got the vitamin D message out bigger and quicker and earlier.
No, thank you, and thank you for answering that question. I think that's a really, it's hard when that happens, that you can't, that data can't come out, maybe for other reasons, but I think the message is there that that we need to use the research to actually get the data and get it published, and then to actually learn from that information. I think what I'd like to do is, so thank you very much. In terms of finishing, we're going to have Right Honourable Caroline Flint next. I just wanted to say a few comments from the audience, loads of fantastic comments that everyone's been sending through. Thanks for an informative morning, thoughtful, insightful, enjoyable, you know, fabulous participants. Of course, our research participants, absolutely amazing, excellent presentations. Great presentations, so really fantastic engagement from the audience online, and fantastic engagement from our audience here for all your support and questions here. So thank you. I think that just my concluding comment is that research, it's really hope for the future, that things can change and will change if we're all involved in research, whatever we do in healthcare or any aspect. We can actually make changes and ensuring that data gets out there and that that's published and that other people can learn. So now I will introduce you to Right Honourable Caroline Flint, who's our chair at Humber Teaching NHS Foundation Trust. And Caroline started with us this year and has 22 years of career, as many of you may know, as a politician and a Labour MP from 97 to 2019, and was indeed the first woman MP for Don Valley. So please can I introduce you and have a warm welcome for Right Honourable Caroline Flint and to close today.
Thanks very much, Soraya. And it's interesting just obviously listening to Professor Semple and his last comment about data and putting it into the public domain. I suppose, you know, one of the aspects of research, and whether that is done through anonymized data that can be collected from all our health records, which in itself is such a valuable resource in terms of approaching and looking at different ways in which we can do health, the impacts of medicines, who we are, where we live, and what that contributes to our health and well-being. Or where we've heard today, people coming forward and willing to take part in these research projects we've heard so much about. And at the heart of all that, I suppose, is trust. Is trust in what we are trying to do and why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. And in all of this, I think really good communications about what research is all about and what it's not about is vitally important. And, you know, data is becoming so much more part of our lives, and how we can use it can be incredibly beneficial. But I think for all of us working within health and with others who work with us as our partners, is always recognizing that we need to bring people with us rather than see research as something we just do to people. And I think some of the projects we've heard about today exemplify how you can create trust and how you can create relationships and how you can have good comms that actually reaches people and speak to people in a language they find comforting and an encouragement to take part. There is evidence that people do better in organisations that do research, and therefore here at our trust we see research as a core part of the service we provide for our community, and I would say also for our staff to feel that it enriches their professional understanding and development too. And in the last 4 years alone, we've doubled the number of people taking part in research studies, and we've expanded the areas that we do research in. We heard today again from Professor Semple about the impact of COVID-19 on the infrastructure that has been developed and the collaboration that has been developed to understand how this virus was working throughout our communities, and the importance of maintaining and developing that infrastructure for the years ahead. And in September, I was very honoured to attend an event where I met Dame Professor Sarah Gilbert and hear from her and her colleagues about the design of the Oxford vaccine, which apparently, actually the design in the lab took a couple of weeks. I mean, I find that bizarre, but apparently it just took a couple of weeks to design it in the lab. But obviously after that was the extensive research and testing that had to take place, and which could have only been made possible by the volunteers who stepped up to help make that happen and for us to be able to receive that vaccine. But it might never have been, apparently, because I found out not only that we had been at the University of East Anglia at the same time. She was in biological studies, I was in history and literature, and maybe there is an issue for connecting from science to the arts and humanities, a conversation in all of this when it comes to communications. She went on actually to do her PhD at the University of Hull. I'm afraid to say, and I'm sure it's improved at the University of Hull in the decades since, she actually considered packing in science altogether, because she found the tunnel-like focus not to her liking. And she was interviewed earlier this year, and she explained this by saying she wasn't attracted to working on her own on one subject for a very long time. She said, "That's not the way I like to work. I like to take into account different ideas from lots of different areas." So thankfully, she decided to give her scientific career another chance. I sort of feel that coming together at this conference, it is our hope that we can provide different ideas from lots of different areas, research studies and ideas which can stand on their own, but together enrich our understanding and professional connections to a bigger health and community picture of which we all play a part. I think a really important message to get across, both to some of those who work within our community, but also our patients and their families, is that research isn't something to be feared. Some clinicians may hear that word and think it's all about dusting off the statistics manuals and finding lots of extra time. Patients might think it's all about people in white coats and testing new drugs. I think we've had a flavour today of how diverse the opportunities for research are and how importantly inclusive they can be too. I think it provides us the opportunity to share some of the positives from research and our learning, and I hope it lets our community across our huge geographical patch know that we're committed to changing the future of health and social care for them, that this conference is just a taster of what's going on, and there's so much more. And there's so much more tomorrow when you can join us again and find out more about how we're discovering new areas in where we can provide the services that we give every day, but also learn from each other across the different professional disciplines and learn how that connects us together in a very, very positive and important way. My thanks to everybody who's taken part this morning, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you, and goodbye everyone. Thank you so much for everything and all the presenters and everyone's contributions. Bye bye.